This is the best of the MMA Outsiders on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Happy New Year, everybody! Welcome to the best of the MMA Outsiders 2023. That is Zan. I am Tom. And Zan, 2023 was a heck of a year in this sport. We had a lot of talk about best performances inside the cage, inside the octagon last week on our MMA Outsiders award show for 2023. Go check that out if you missed it. But here, we're going to look back and Zan at some of our most popular clips from the year. Obviously, we put out clips on social media after every episode, and we've had a range of the popular clips, Zan, and that includes some of the most popular headlines and news stories that we talked about all throughout 2023, controversies, and so much more. So we're gonna use this to take your words that you said kind of before we did all this recording, a little bit of a time machine of sorts, going back and
Mhm.
seeing the most standout things, standout talking points that we've had in 2023.
Yeah, and for those of you who are like, wait, where is last year's best tip? Well, the answer is we didn't do one. About halfway through the fall, it was brought to our attention that, well, maybe this would be a good idea considering that there was a lot of MMA news and notes throughout the year 2023. And for those of you who have been following the show since its inception, 2023 was the first full year that the MMA Outsiders has been a podcast. So now with a little over 15 or 16 months under our belt, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe a little bit less. We now have a full year of content that we can fully um, bring to you guys in recap form. But before we get into all of that and so much more, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network across social media platforms at ETB Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok, and so much more. You can follow our show at MMA Outsiders ETB. I'm and as all of you know by now, I'm a staff writer over at bjpen.com and a Sunday news writer for MMA Knockout, part of the Sports Illustrated Fan Nation umbrella. You can find in my work at those two outlets and follow me at Bando 99. And then, of course, to my left, my longtime co-host Tom Albano. You can find his work as a contributor over at MMA News and Inside the MMA. And of course, he is also your main live results person for the PFL website during the PFL subsequent seasons, both stateside and now internationally. So stay tuned for more from him as 2024 gets underway. As you were alluding to earlier, Tom, 2023 was just an absolutely wild year from start to finish, and it felt like there were really no breaks in between. It felt like it was just one long season, and it felt like once one quarter ended, it was almost like you barely got any time to even, think about what happened in Q1, and you were instantly moving into Q2. What did you think of the vibes of the entire year overall, just as an MMA consumer and as a media member? And do you think this was in because I personally think so? For me personally, I thought it was the most exhausting year that I've experienced in MMA. What did you think? What did you think of the year that was?
I feel that same way. I feel that same way. Now, I feel it for good reasons. Obviously, we had the idea of just some of the big performances that we had inside the some real bangers. We talked about it last week on the award shows and some bangers that were produced specifically by the UFC during the summer, with 3 or 4 straight pay-per-views that were very high quality. But then you also had some big talking points outside of the cage, whether it be the PFL purchasing Bellator, Francis Ngannou and him leaving the UFC, joining the PFL, going into the boxing world. So it felt like all of this whirlwind. Uh, the start of the year, I mentioned last week, Zan, the start of the year, obviously we had the Dana White controversy. So we were off where he wife. So we were off to a really rough kind of start. And there were outside the cage plenty of highs and lows in sport. And to be quite honest, and in terms of combat sports, even as we're sitting here, it really hasn't stopped
No,
because
it is
we're
not.
recording this on the 22nd. Tomorrow we've got the day after we're recording this, we've got the Day of Reckoning boxing card. And then we have, I think it's the Inouye fight the day after Christmas. So
Mhm.
even as we're sitting here recording this, it hasn't stopped. And by the time you guys are watching this on January 1st, you know, that's the one time that I think we get any sort of break. Obviously, the day before this goes out, we've had the Ryzen card for New Year's, and then just in about a week and a half time, we're gonna have our first UFC card of the year. So,
Mhm.
as you always say, Zan, this is the sport without an off season. It's just constant go, 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 and for better or for worse, it leads to sometimes that we're sitting here at the end of the year, and it's like,
Yeah, no kidding. And I guess you could sum that up with two words. And I'm currently, not feeling this way, but I think you can get to the end of the year and say that you're definitely, if you weren't already and you're one of these crazy combat sports consumers, you're probably feeling a bit of MMA burnout. But for those of you who only follow the UFC, you actually get a little bit of a break, which might end up being the longest break in the end of 2024, just given how the UFC schedule works with their 42 events a year and stuff like that. But we don't want to harp on it too much longer. We had a ton of news and notes this year, and a lot of just very interesting stories, both positively and negatively. But to say that 2023 got off on the wrong foot would be a total understatement, and I think you would agree with that.
yeah, I mean, Dan, so I should explain for those out there. So for the way we're going to divide it, since we constantly talk about Q1, Q2, that's basically how we're going to divide this into four segments. One focused on January through March, one focused on April through June, one focused on July through September, and then one focused on October through December. I mean, that's how the UFC tends to do it. We just had a press conference for the January through March, technically stretching into April, but nothing was really announced too much about that other than say UFC 300, that
Yeah,
press
I would.
conference before
Yeah, I
296.
would. I would say that was the only definitive date that was on the calendar for April was 300.
So, but yeah, I mean, starting off in a very major way, January because we had the whole start of the whole saga, Sam, that really took over 2023. It won our story for 2023 award last week. Francis Ngannou vacating the UFC Heavyweight Championship, leaving the promotion, and then eventually, as you'll see in later segments, him joining the PFL and such. But Sam, we were only one episode in, I think, to 2023, and then we're sitting there doing a breaking news stream that is essentially another episode with how long and how much we talked about Francis Ngannou leaving the UFC.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was either 2 or 3 days later that we like immediately jumped on a breaking news live stream because it felt like we had covered everything going into that week, and that's when that news broke. And we were speculating on that original episode, like when Francis would come back, and you and I had penciled in that March would have been more than likely the date where the Jones fight would have taken place. And sure enough, the news broke to where Dana revealed that he was no longer with the promotion. And that's when we went into overdrive and said, yeah, we need to cover this because he literally broke it at the press conference right now. And we gave our instant reaction. And at the time, I think I was a little bitter just because the fight wasn't happening and we had waited like over a year and a half to see it. And I think you had felt similarly, but as more info came out, I think our opinions on the whole ordeal and what Francis eventually decided to do, which you're going to see in later segments. Of course, I think as the year progressed, we started to get a different sense of opinion. Like, oh, this is really setting in that one of the UFC's biggest stars is actually walking away and doing what he feels is in his best interest. And I think that's something that a lot of MMA fans almost missed, but as time went on, I think the ones who wanted to get it did, and the ones who didn't did it. or did
Yeah.
not rather.
Yeah, and it's just the start to a whole saga. I mean, it definitely. I mean, let's be honest. Jones versus Ngannou is the biggest missed fight of 2023. There is no question about it. But
Tom,
I
you could
think some
argue.
people,
Tom, you could argue it might be the biggest missed fight since 2008.
yeah,
Hmm.
since failing Fedor and Couture, since failing of Fedor and Lesnar, it's definitely one of the biggest missed fights. One of the biggest missed opportunities of all time. And I said last week, Sam, you know, they should have struck while the iron was hot in 2020 when didn't know what was going on with Stipe and Cormier and their trilogy and just made Jones and Ngannou for an interim title fight, especially at a time of a pandemic where people needed sports content and people were looking for an escape from the COVID pandemic that you could have on that May or June or July pay-per-view, you could have thrown a Jones and Ngannou on fight on there and people would have flocked to it.
You could have, but then again, I could understand the UFC's position considering that those two are big stars and you'd want to have fans in the building for that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, also in January, Dana White, like we said, getting off on the wrong foot. Dana White, slapping his wife caught on film at a New Year's party, and it ultimately ends up, he's obviously he took the blame. Obviously, he understood, whatever could come his way. Not much really came his way though, except Power Slap did suffer. Power Slap lost its TBS deal after one season, goes on to Rumble, and you also had and that basically, I don't know if you remember this, but Dana interacting with you and basically on social media promising that he was going to make Power Slap safer, which I don't
Yeah,
know if he exactly held up to.
yeah, I remember that. I just remember it being hilarious because a bunch of outlets picked up on it. I think there was an Australian outlet that picked up on it. There was essentially sports picked up on it, and the person who wrote the story was like, Zan, I've never written an MMA story before. How did I do? So it was when so, so that was when I was like, okay, this is really weird, and obviously I
An
had to go.
MMA story. I didn't know bitch slapping somebody counts as MMA.
and then I knew it's weird once I put the Instagram story out. Where I was like, what have I done?
You got yourself into quite some, I can't say messes, but quite some situations on social
I
media
don't
where
know.
you
I
interacting
don't.
with Dana.
I don't. Oh no! Oh, there were some people on Twitter that I had never even seen before that apparently hated me after that for really no reason at all in my opinion. But yeah, it was definitely a very awkward 20 minutes of fame. That's for sure. But yeah, it
And
was
then of
it was
course,
definitely
Sam.
it was definitely a very weird time with Power Slap, considering that a ton of people were against it, and of course, people even before the Dana White slap incident, people were talking about, oh, should TBS really be carrying this? Is this good for the integrity of the network? And it obviously wasn't because they canceled it and it was moved on to Rumble. But what were you gonna say?
Oh no, you were making the final points, which are fair enough about which are fair enough. Obviously, there was the whole controversy. Obviously, I'm not as much of a Power Slap fan as you are. I mean, does it do some crazy numbers on social media? I think Dana blows it out of proportion a little bit. But I
Yeah, I
just I
think
just don't get it.
yeah, I think he loves it a little bit too much, in my opinion.
Could you imagine if one day he says, "Screw the UFC, I'll just do Power Slap," completely.
I wouldn't be surprised. Honestly.
Uh, but then we had a couple of other stories that took a hold of things in quarter one. Obviously, we had Fedor Emelianenko's retirement, which we talked a little bit about last week. Uh, we had, speaking of Jon Jones, when he ends up winning at UFC 285, the whole idea about it, has he solidified himself over GSP as the GOAT? Are the goalposts going to be moved because it's Jon Jones? I don't know if you remember this one, Zan, but Dan Hooker. So we talked about Islam Makhachev, Alex Volkanovski won, which won our fight of the year last week. Dan Hooker had the claim that Makhachev had used an IV, which would have been illegal under the USADA,
I do remember
sanctions.
that.
So we had that, and then we also had the start to another year of Conor McGregor controversy, even though he never competed inside the cage. From the accusation,
Because of course we did.
yeah, we had the accusation of him assaulting a woman on a yacht, and then the start of the official announcement of him and Chandler hosting Tough, and all this debate about does this mean that Connor's going to get a title shot with a win? Does that mean, it's a must win for who? And then, of course, we find out by the end of the year that we're still waiting for that fight to happen.
Yeah, we're still waiting, and at the time we're recording this, we have no idea when the fight's going to happen or if it will happen. We've no idea.
So that's a basic sum up of Q1. Take a look at the clips. We'll be back with you to introduce Q2.
All other options off the table, right? I feel like the PFL, if you're looking at what Ngannou wants, obviously he wants a big paycheck, which he got offered by the UFC. He wants that flexibility. He wants, that stipulation to go out and fight a Tyson Fury. I think you're going to check all those boxes if you go to the PFL. Now, Bellator, while they allow that flexibility, I don't feel like they have the financial space to really give Ngannou that kind of contract. Now, he said in the past that money really isn't the issue here. It's about the terms of the contract. Now, obviously you'd get that with Bellator, but if you're looking at all the boxes that you could check, I wouldn't be shocked at all if Ngannou looks at the PFL, looks at, no offense, the PFL's heavyweight roster, but it's not to the extent of Bellator's heavyweight roster, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we can all agree with that. So if you're looking at, lesser competition, same amount of money you could probably get from the UFC and getting that flexibility, you would check all those boxes, no doubt.
Which is funny because I saw Brad Whedon tweeting out basically his thoughts, and he said that basically the one downside to his free agency and leaving the UFC is you look at the matchups he could have had with the UFC versus the matchups he will have with either Bellator or the PFL, that basically nothing that Bellator or PFL could do in terms of heavyweight opponents can compare to a Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones, a Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic 3, a Francis Ngannou versus a Cyril Gane 2 even. And while I kind of agree, you are right that I think he's looking at the bigger picture. He's not just looking at MMA opponents, because as I agree with you, Curtis, he is the best heavyweight fighter in the world. The winner of this free agency battle, if it truly is between Bellator and PFL, at this point, the number 2 spot for MMA promotion in the world could be on the line in this free agency.
Posted a promo basically telling people to watch episode 2 of Power Slap. And basically, when you go into his comments thread, it's filled with thousands of private accounts. And basically, every single one of them said, "Oh, I don't like it. This is brutal, whatever, whatever." And every single person, like that I saw at least, commented private account, got all replies back from Dana White himself about it. So I sarcastically chimed in and said, well, thanks for being transparent and trying to make slap fighting as safe as you can. And he was like, I appreciate it. Yes, as you continue to watch the show, it'll be made much safer. And I couldn't believe it.
So Zan, were you or were you not being sarcastic making that?
No, I was. I was hoping that he would. I was hoping that he wouldn't look at my profile and say private account 2 or fake account 2, but he actually replied. I couldn't believe it.
Oh my god! And how do you get yourself into these things, then? Like that's my question. How do you get yourself into these things?
I don't know. I wasn't expecting a reply, but I'm like,
because I liked reading your story the next day, and it's like, oh my god, what have I done?
Yeah. But I just think it was funny that there were 3 outlets, no names mentioned. One of them described me as a fan. Another one described me as a sports writer. And then another one described me as a journalist. To show that, he can kind of just, unfortunately, as sad as it is, can do whatever he wants whenever he wants and expect no repercussions. I just think it shows that his priorities and his head is in a different place, and it's not a good sign because it could mean stuff that's happened throughout his career that we don't know about yet. And I'm not saying he has signs of anything or anything like that, but it's just unfortunate to see someone with so much talent and so much promise, and him being the biggest star the UFC's ever had, just be in this position over and over and over again. And it seems like he's just never held accountable for any of his actions. It's been like 7 or 8 years since this, since his whole run of popularity started. The UFC needs to take a stand, and they've been horrible at it. They'll only do it to fighters that, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It's just the truth. They'll only do it to fighters where they don't think that fighter can make them the most money possible. Or are they going to do it with McGregor? Probably not, and that's the unfortunate thing.
Dana White cannot come up with the nobody is bigger than the UFC bull crap, because what this is proving is that Conor McGregor is, for better or for worse, bigger than the.
I don't know about you, but Francis seems to me like he's the first fighter of a trend where it's going to be more fighters like him that are going to come out and really say all of these things, after being quote unquote free, without getting the repercussions of the UFC, if that makes sense. It just feels to me that Francis is trying to do something that other fighters have been quote unquote scared to do because of what might happen to them. And it's like from his perspective, he does not care. And more power to him.
As much as we talk about last week with Curtis and Dillon, the opportunity for PFL in the super fight division, the money that could be made from a potential Fury and Ngannou fight would be pretty incredible. And it would be definitely more, and Ngannou's pay would be definitely more than $8 million for that fight.
I think it would be the biggest boxing crossover fight since Mayweather-McGregor. And I hate to say it, but it might actually even be bigger than that if done the right way.
If done the right way. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, considering McGregor's star power, but it definitely presents a better opportunity for pay. And as you mentioned, if that happens, then, as you kind of alluded to, how many more fighters are going to take a similar kind of route?
I will say this, though. I do think it's funny how they try to build it up as this thing. Oh, it was popular in Russia, so it can be popular here. And it's like, really?
Zan, have you seen... Zan, hold on. Have you seen what they do over there? Have you not seen the car jujitsu, the telephone move fights? Are you saying that something that those things over there can just magically make their way over here? They're nuts over there. They're nuts over there in Japan. Just because they work over here there does that mean they will work over here. As much as, I'm addicted to that stuff when it gets into my feed.
No. What I'm
if we have power sand, if we have power slap, then I want to see a car jiu-jitsu league here in the United States.
No, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. What I'm trying to tell you is that I just think it's funny that they think because it works in Russia, it gets millions of views in Russia, that it can work over here. I mean, of course, don't we know that Russia doesn't have any rules when it comes to sports? They can let anything happen. Same with Japan with the freak show fights. Like I said, I want car jiu-jitsu.
I want car jiu-jitsu here in America. I want telephone booth MMA fights here in America. I want jiu-jitsu matches to take place inside of shark cages. I'm just ready. I'm just ready to go off, man. I'm just ready to let loose. I want sanctioned mixed martial arts fights to take place in supermarkets, in shopping malls.
In supermarkets.
Yeah, and I mean, if you wanna hit your opponent with an apple, why not?
Easily see this being the most watched Ultimate Fighter season in years, if not the biggest Ultimate Fighter season ever, just because of who's on the top of the bill. As for the fight itself, I do think Conor McGregor is being gifted a little bit of almost a mini number one contendership fight, and I'll explain what I mean by that. People seem to forget, unless you're a hardcore fan, that Conor McGregor has won one fight in a matter of about 6 years. My whole thought process is, if you're coming off of several consecutive losses, which he has, including 2 losses to Dustin Poirier, I think you need to earn it. And I just simply don't think that Conor McGregor deserves a fight with Michael Chandler. But hey, it's going to do big business. There's a lot of bad blood. It's apparent that Chandler doesn't like him. There's not really a read on how Conor was about Chandler, but he probably doesn't like him either. And it should create for a pretty incredible build-up.
He hasn't won a meaningful fight since November 2016. He hasn't won a meaningful fight since he won the lightweight championship and became a champ. His only win ever since then has been against Cowboy Cerrone, and no disrespect to Cowboy, but Cowboy from 2020 or 2019 on was not the same Cowboy. Unfortunately, it is a contenders fight. There's always going to be, I mean, Zan, it was just last year where we were thinking what was going to happen with the lightweight championship. And after Dustin had lost to Charles Oliveira, after Charles Oliveira missed weight, both those times, what did we say? It's like, oh, here's an opportunity now for the UFC to insert Conor McGregor, even though he's coming off a number of losses, doesn't deserve a championship fight. And even though, Zan, this fight, you're talking about rankings, here's the caveat. These two are going to compete at welterweight. They're going to be at 170 pounds. And yet we're talking about a potential title shot at 155 pounds just because that's the weight that both of these guys. And I love Fedor. I salute him and all that he has done for the sport and everything he has done, the career that he has had. One of the great heavyweights of all time, one of the greatest to have never stepped foot in the UFC. He should not have been in that fight. That was a one-sided bloodbath against Vader.
No, he shouldn't have been, especially with, CBS the first time that Bellator was going to be on network TV. It probably wasn't a good look for the people who had never seen an MMA fight before.
And going to what we're talking about with the second half of Fedor's career, I mean, just his Bellator run in general. I know we said with a lot we were rating it about 6 or so, but I think with the one-sided loss that it did, Zan, I think it was enough to knock it down to a 5 or a 4 out of 10. His run in Bellator, for all that I praised Vader for, was really, really underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, to only look at wins against Tim Johnson and Quentin Rampage Jackson to really judge him was kind of unfortunate.
And Frank Mir and Chael Sonnen, one of them even a true heavyweight.
Yeah, as you alluded to, his Bellator run just wasn't what, kind of what they were hoping for. And, they got an aging star. And sometimes those things are going to happen. And, I think it's just about how we view his whole career, holistically instead of the second half of it. Because really his career was him dominating an era where no heavyweight, not even Randy Couture, was as dominant as he was. And that's the unfortunate thing. We never got to see Randy Couture versus Fedor Emelianenko. We never got to see Fedor versus Brock Lesnar. Those were the two fights that got away to determine who the baddest man on the planet was. And I think you and I both know who would have won those fights. I think Fedor, in all due respect to Brock and Randy, I I think Fedor would have won. I think the loser of this fight, their stock plummets way down than what it currently is now, and that's what I think makes it more interesting. Is I think whoever loses this fight, there's more of a fallback on them, and whoever wins this fight, because of how crazy the lightweight division is now. We have no idea what the landscape could be 5 or 6 months from now, depending on what happens at UFC 284, which we'll get to in a little bit. But now inserting McGregor back into things makes the whole glamour division of 155/170, if you will, given this fight, a lot more interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to try to emphasize the point that you're making. Are you saying that this is a must-win for Conor McGregor? And if you are saying that, then what is the fallback? What can you see happening?
Yeah, I do think this is a must-win for McGregor, but it's almost like he keeps getting chance after chance. So even if he loses in, let's say, controversial fashion again, the UFC is more than likely to make up an excuse and say, "Oh, he wasn't 100%," or the referee intervened and caused the fight to get stopped one way or another. I just feel like he's the only fighter in the sport that can basically get away with whatever he wants, with whether it's in the cage or out of the cage, and still get life 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and what have you. And you can't say that about any other fighter, which means that if Chandler doesn't finish him, I think he's in for a bad night, because I think that's the only way he can win this fight, is if he wins by finish, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, those are some pretty crazy accusations, but the thing that doesn't sit with me is, where is the proof that Hooker has that this really happened? If he can't prove that Makhachev had an IV prior to the fight, to basically gain a competitive advantage, then he shouldn't be tweeting things that he doesn't actually know himself, instead of just going off of happenstance and older news. What do you think?
Like you said, it's kind of tough when we don't really have the accusations. Although,
See, that's what I'm saying. What's the point of making claims when it seems like, unless he hasn't publicly shared it, where is the proof? You know what I mean?
But it's actually kind of interesting, Zan, just going through the MMA news cycle. Volkanovski appeared on Helwani's show the other day and said, quote, "You fill up pretty quick on the IVs and stuff like that. Maybe that's a little shot at them. You hear whispers, but anyway." So a little dig there at Makhachev over the IVs. I will say, Zan, during the weigh-in, when I saw how Makhachev looked at the weigh-in, I was a little concerned. He looked a little drained there at 155 pounds, and he needed, I believe, what MMA fighting calls the box of shame just to make the 155-pound limit. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying, here or there if that required the IV usage, but the weight cut didn't seem to affect him all too much when it came to the actual fight.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, if you look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, he's 29-0, but as you and I have discussed several times on this program, who did he really beat until he fought Dustin Poirier? You know what I mean? If you look at the legends that Jones has fought over the course of his title run, you look down the list, and it's literally champion, former champion, or future champion, or future title challenger in literally every single fight. You can't say that about very few fighters, maybe Jordan St. Pierre, maybe Anderson Silva, but I truly think the way Jones has dominated the sport over the course of a decade puts him in a class of its own, and I don't even think this is a debate. He is number one, and his records will never be broken.
Sean Sheehan, a couple of hours before we went on the air, Zan, said that basically there's just 4 names that can be debated for greatest of all time at this point, and that's Jon Jones, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, and Demetrius Johnson. And I would say, Zan, at this point, I think you can only really narrow it down to Jon Jones and George St. Pierre. Our boy Drake Riggs actually tweeted something out just, in the immediate aftermath of UFC 285 over the weekend, saying, here's what it comes down to at this point, Zan. If you think that out of the octagon issues,
like the legal issues, the drug issues that Jon Jones has faced. If you are to take any of that into account for the title of greatest of all time, at this point, you have to go with George St. Pierre. If you do not count any of that, then at this point, you have to go with Jon Jones. The kind of performance, the kind of domination that he put on Jon Jones. And now to say, to join an elite group of fighters, then, who have won UFC championships in 2 different weight classes. At this point, it's like, in my mind, second time, Stipe Miocic waits in the wings and refuses nothing but another championship fight, and it pays off. The first time, first he does this when Daniel Cormier is negotiating with Brock Lesnar, and those deals fall through, and he swoops in and ends up winning back the heavyweight championship. And now here he is. He hasn't fought in 2 years because he's been waiting, after losing his championship to Francis for another shot. And then Francis leaves the promotion, and then all of a sudden, Zan, the leverage that Stipe had goes from down here on the ground to up here. And now the fact that Jon Jones has topped Cyril Gane, and Cyril Gane is out of the picture, there's only one clear person for Jon Jones to fight, and that is Stipe Miocic. And you know what? And I was thinking, Zan, all this time, it's like, we easily think that Jones is won, and I do think Jones is won now when it comes to GOAT status. He's number 1 now again in the UFC pound per pound rankings. He's 1 fight back in 3 years, and he's already number 1 again. I'm thinking in my head, is this kind of goalpost moving for Jones? It's like, okay, first you gotta, beat, First, you got to move up to heavyweight, and he does. Okay, now you got to win the UFC heavyweight championship, and he does. Are we going to continue to move the goalpost back and say, okay, now you're only going to be the GOAT if you beat Stipe Miocic?
I don't know if it's about that, because obviously GOAT's a matter of opinion, right? So therefore, you don't exactly know where people sit on that. But what I can tell you is this: no matter what, you hate Jon Jones, you love Jon Jones. I'm sort of in the middle. I feel about Power Slap and all the other controversial things that go on with this crazy sport. I'm able to separate all that. When you separate it and really look at the numbers of is Jones moving the goalpost? And as much as people don't like him, I truly think that Jon Jones is moving the goalpost. He is a revolution in a way that I don't think people realize. He goes in and dominates light heavyweight for 10 years, something that no man on the face of the planet has been able to do in any promotion, let alone the UFC number 1. Then he goes in and it's like, yeah, I can move up to heavyweight and I can have their heavyweight champion essentially walk away from the sport because I'm so powerful and I want to be able to control everything. And I'm not saying that Jones used his power to do it, but he is so good that he's making other champions almost not be scared of him, but they're making him be like, oh, this guy is so legit that he can take over any division that he so chooses because he's literally that good. So I think in terms of moving the goalpost, yes, he's doing things that no UFC fighter has ever done before, and you just have to give him props because I think he's one of the few fighters who can do it successfully and is doing it successfully.
And so now on to April through June, quarter 2 of 2023. And Zan, we actually had a interesting guest in couple of interesting guests really in 2023, but one of which, Zan, in April, you got to interview Albano and Zain before his big fight with one championship.
Yeah, I remember this interview very well, and I remember how heavily One Championship was pushing this event, considering it was their first ever U.S. show, and he obviously went on and dominated. So that was a very cool experience to have that hosted here, and it definitely made me interested in seeing what One Championship could do, although the future of One Championship at this point seems very, very slim in terms of an MMA perspective. They really moved their focus on the Muay Thai and kickboxing, so it'll be interesting to see where Anwar goes from here. I think he's still one of the best fighters in the world, but Yeah, that was definitely a very unique time considering one championship was the center of the MMA world for at least 1 week, considering there was no major UFC or anything like that. So definitely very, very cool.
We also, Zan, had in April the official announcement of the WWE UFC merger of sorts, the Endeavor deal, which of course now the joint production now known as TKO, and we talked about what that could mean for TV deals at the time. Now UFC and ESPN are hand in hand, as was, as is, as what it'll seem to be always will be at this point. Uh, but we talked about what that could mean also on the WWE end, even though this is an MMA show, a little bit of that, which was uh which was kind of fun, and we actually talked about it a little bit on the ETB Sports best ofs, which I host ETB Sports alongside Nick Morgerson.
Mm-hmm.
We also had a couple of other stories. We continued on with the Jon Jones talk about the potential fight with Stipe Miocic, about if it could be held at MSG in November, and of course that goes on to be the plan. And then Jon Jones tears his pectoral muscle.
Right, exactly.
We talked about Leon Edwards and what could happen with the, what his next title fight would be. Of course, now we know where he retains the championship against Colby Covington in December. And then, of course, and in May, it was nothing but Francis Ngannou once again, as Francis Ngannou ends up signing with the PFL. And originally, Zan, I remember people like you getting very impatient. You had just mentioned that people were very bitter about the fact that we weren't going to get Jones versus Ngannou, it seemed. And it had been about 4 months and we had nothing on the Francis Ngannou front. And we were like, what's going on here? It's the point where some people, even you, had thrown this theory out there. Maybe he should have just apologized and tried to work something out with the
Yeah.
UFC. Although it seemed like even then, the UFC and Dana had moved on to the Jones Stipe fight.
Yeah, and at the time I felt that my opinion was correct considering that we had heard nothing, number one, and number two, there were no plans at the moment, only rumors of sorts that Jones may be fighting Stipe, and no one really knew what to make of it. And we just thought the Tyson Fury idea, which we'll see later on in the show, eventually materialized. He just thought the Tyson Fury idea of him crossing over was just crazy because there was going to be too much money involved. There was going to be too many clauses involved, promoters, the whole thing. He didn't actually think it was possible until I think it was the second week in May that he officially signed with the PFL, which is where things became more real. Like, oh, these crossover fights may actually be possible now. And as people initially, he's and Francis fumbled the bag. Well, he did anything. He did anything but that, as we later found out.
Correct, but we did have several questions. I think, Zan, there are still several questions about Francis's signing, like how the PFL could, afford the kind of contract that they gave Francis Ngannou, which now we kind of assume, considering that Saudi Arabia has put a lot of money behind the PFL, that maybe that them combined with already the sponsors and investors that they have kind of is the reason why they were able to give Francis Ngannou the kind of deal of sorts that he was looking for. And to
Right.
Francis Ngannou's credit, he is, through his deal. Yes, it allows him to be a superstar. Yes, it allows him to get more money than he could have gotten with the UFC. It also allows him to basically be a champion of fighter rights and better fighter pay, which is a topic that has endlessly been a controversy in combat sports.
Yeah, and especially with the impending lawsuit still going on, it's going to be, I'm sure, even more of a topic of discussion as we get into the mid part of Q1 and early Q2 of 2024. No question about it.
And even then, Zan, even when, you had the opinion about, well, he should go back to the UFC, try to work something out. Some of the way Dana was talking, we mention it during in these clips. The hearing the rumors about him about Ngannou and Fury and saying we don't do gimmick fights, which we had an absolute laugh about, considering you were there in Chicago with CM Punk versus Mike Jackson, and
I
you
was.
were
Yep.
Right, you were there for that, and then it's like a couple weeks later. I think it was a couple weeks. I don't know. My time the time machine in my brain is broken, but the time machine in our Tesla works. He tried to make he tried to throw a counter offer to Tyson Fury to fight Jon Jones.
2 weeks later is what it was.
It's unbelievable, and we never thought, and we still don't think that it was really serious because we don't think that Dana is going to ever co-promote ever again after the whole
No,
thing with McGregor and Mayweather.
no, no. Well, I can probably say with 99% certainty, unless the rare, and I mean rare in like all caps, if the rare opportunity comes up, yeah, but 99.9% probably not ever again. No.
And then in June, we moved from all about Ngannou to all about McGregor, previewing Tough 31, talking about McGregor still not being in the USADA pool at the time, and then more accusations with him punching the Miami Heat mascot and supposedly putting the guy in there in the hospital, and the whole sexual assault accusation at the NBA Finals game with the Heat. Just for everything, for all the different controversies and all the questions that we still to this day don't have about the Francis Ngannou situation, Sam. Yeah, I would rather talk about that than talk about somebody who we still have no idea as of the time we're recording this if he's even going to come back to the UFC or not.
I would 100% concur with that.
He's
Although based on we're not gonna obviously say who, but based on what we're hearing, I am more hopeful today than it was a month ago that McGregor versus Chandler could happen at some point in 2024. Let me just
well,
let me just put it that way.
I know, but you know my take. Hopefully UFC
Mhm.
300, but my take is it's UFC 300 or bust. You can't have
I
for what
agree.
for after what Dana had the balls to say at the press conference of, you'll see two fighters on the early prelims in the first early prelim, like they're on the early prelims. You cannot have a UFC 200 situation where UFC 200 ends up being a much bigger and better card than UFC. I mean, UFC 202 was a much bigger and better card than UFC 200.
I'm sorry, but Bo Nickel versus Cody Brundage does not scream that sentence to me. If
Exactly.
if that is somehow on the early prelims.
I get it. I get because the UFC is all aboard the Bo Nickel train, and I get
Right.
his height, and I get his height, but UFC 300. I mean, Zan, for all the Bellator, what happened and what went wrong with Bellator,
Okay.
and it ends up not being 4 title fights because of one fight dropping out, and so it's just 3. But when Bellator 300 has 3 title fights and nearly could have had a 4th, you're the UFC. You can get, 3 or 4 title fights on a card, even if you don't want to do 3 or 4 title fights. Put 2 title fights in McGregor Chandler, and then some other big name fight on that 300 card. Stick to your word, Dana. Stop the promoter BS.
Yeah, and by the time we recorded this, they'll be 2 weeks away from the 3 month out time frame. So based on that, they need to get a move on, and they need to get a move on fast.
I mean, I saw the recent announcement about 298 and some of the cards from 298 to 300, and they definitely have they definitely are trying to stack those cards. Thank God the UFC pay-per-view prices are not increasing. Uh, but for UFC 300, it goes to what we've been talking about in our episodes, Zan. If you're booking O'Malley for 299, if Islam's not going to be ready till after Ramadan, you're booking Bulk for 298. McGregor and Chandler, you're saying not till summer. Who? Who is headlining that UFC 300 card? You're going to get
well,
Aspinall for an interim title fight?
my guess now would be Izzy versus Pereira 5 if they give Izzy enough money to do it.
And they got to give him the money because Izzy wants to take a break from this sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's a frustrating situation at this point, but take a look back at us on quarter 2 for the MMA Outsiders, and we'll see you after that for quarter 3. The contract with NBC for Monday Night Raw and Fox for Friday Night SmackDown expire in October 2024. WWE like to do their TV rights stuff a year in advance, so this is going to basically be worth watching now that they're going to be under some new ownerships, as well, Zan, as the idea that the UFC's deal with ESPN and the WWE's deal with Peacock, because the WWE had formed the WWE Network in 2014, but obviously that became part of Peacock within 2021. I wonder if any of that is affected by this. Like when 2020, end of 2025 or start of 2026 comes around, does the UFC stay with ESPN? Does WWE stay with Peacock? Or what happens from here? I could definitely see, as of this year, the WWE continues to negotiate for its linear TV deals with, your Monday Night Raw and your Friday Night SmackDown on its own. I wonder, however, if any of that is going to be affected by the future, where later this year, when WWE is trying to finalize its linear TV packages, is ESPN now going to be in the mix?
I think he's very well rounded, but you can't say his submission game is bad, even though his 2 losses and 1 championship is via submission, But the 2 guys that he fought are very good grapplers, so you can't say that. But I feel like this is a fight where it's going to be exciting because of the fact that he is pretty well rounded. The fight's going to go in all, and everywhere, on the feet, on the ground, and it's going to be an exciting one for the fans. To put on a performance, training camp was great. I'm healthy. I'm able to, unlike my last 2 previous camps, I'm very healthy and I'm ready to go, man. It's going to be a great camp, and I can't wait to put on a great performance.
As much as the UFC stacks it, like, the lower weight classes go first and then the heavier weight classes for multiple title fights, this would be one of those rare cases where it couldn't be that way. Leon Edwards would have to be a co-main event. As I kind of alluded to last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we talked about and we played Matchmaker, the UFC is not going to take Islam Makhachev out of plans for a main event in Abu Dhabi in October. They are not.
No, they won't. They're obviously going to build the entire card around him too, considering that they're bringing him back to Abu Dhabi for the first time as the UFC lightweight champion. You're right. There's no way in the world that it can ruin those plans, considering that it's Abu Dhabi Showdown week that same week, and everyone who's going to be there is more than likely going to be rooting for Makhachev, and that would be a blow to the people over in the UAE, and there would be a lot of very angry, rich people, so to speak, if Islam Makhachev was not on their coveted October Abu Dhabi card, which has now become a tradition since about 2020 or so. So,
and not just not on the card, but I would just say Zan as little as not the main event. So, I mean, if you're Dana, Leon and Colby are going to have to hate to hear this, or whoever Leon would fight as number 1 contender. But if that takes place in Abu Dhabi in October, I'm saying if I'm Dana talking to these guys, fine, but you got to take some sort of cut because you're not going to be main. You're going to be co-main. Yeah, I'm not moving Islam Makhachev, Zan, especially if it's going to be Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier or Islam Makhachev versus Justin Gaethje for a title of hell. Even Islam Makhachev versus Beneil Dariush.
Or the outlier Islam Makhachev versus Conor McGregor.
They are not going to have Conor McGregor do a 1-month turnaround if he beats in September. They are not going to do that.
Nolan King, shout out to him for asking this question. Asked Dana what was going on with the negotiations, and he's like, "This is where everything is taken out of context. I never said that." And it's like, of course, the whole UFC circus starts to get right. So you already know there's gonna be conflict until the days and weeks leading up to this fight. And if we can get to the MSG card unscathed, considering how long it's taken for this fight to happen, I think it'll be a miracle within itself. So, yeah. Early prediction, if the fight does happen, is Jones to win in the 4th round by TKO. But I'm not holding my breath for no upset either. Me being a Midwesterner, I really do want to see Stipe win. It would be fantastic if he was the one to spoil Jones's homecoming, if you will. But and I mean, who doesn't want to see this fight, right? Which leads me to believe that a little someone out there, Francis Ngannou, might be watching a little bit closely, because at the moment we've heard crickets from the former heavyweight champion. So this fight is going to have a lot riding on it, and who knows, maybe Francis will tweet, show me the money again, and or something like that.
Yeah, but Zan, I mean, if imagine though, if it's true that this Stipe fight is going to be Jones's last in MMA, I mean, at that point, Zan, would you? At that point, it's kind of like a blown opportunity, and that's a little bit of my concern. Is, I want this fight to take place, whether it's 290, whether it's Garden. We lost one big heavyweight fight in Jones.
We have the former UFC heavyweight champion of the world. Let's say that again. You have the former UFC heavyweight champion in the world, the highest title you can win in MMA. And you mean to be telling me that he's now going to go in and fight? No disrespect to the heavyweights in the PFL, but you mean to tell me that he's going to go fight guys that are 8-1, 8-2, 11-3, 12-4? What does that do for a guy's career when he's already been at the top of the sport? He's already beat the supposed greatest heavyweight ever. I think it only tarnishes it. And truly, if the PFL is the right option for Francis, good for him. God bless him. He's going to hopefully get paid the money that he wants. But when you're the former heavyweight champion of the world, and it's clear and obvious you don't want to fight the best in the world, I think that says a lot about you. And truly, I really do think that. I mean, I really think that for both parties involved, the UFC and Francis, which obviously the deal fell through, I really do think that both of them are to blame. More so Francis now, from what we're learning. But again, former UFC heavyweight champion of the world. And now I think he's just trying to dissolute his value by doing this, and that's a real shame. And even with the super fight division, like to me, there's just no other fighters that I feel could give him a competitive matchup that makes it even remotely interesting. I think Francis to Bellator is way more appealing than Francis to PFL. And I really think it just kind of waters down the product when you don't have the same caliber of fighters to fight the supposed baddest man on the planet. And I think it's a real shame. And I think these months of negotiations are really, really, really hurting his career. I said it a couple minutes ago, and I'm going to say it again. I really do think financially he's making a huge mistake. I just really don't understand how any of these other promotions, whether it's one championship, the PFL, Bellator, another promotion that I'm not thinking of, probably you could throw Ryzen in there. I just don't see how they could match the value in Francis that the UFC can. And going back to your point about Chael Sonnen, he literally said a couple weeks ago, the thing that Francis needs to do to potentially save his career is he needs to call UFC brass and apologize. Obviously, it doesn't seem like that phone call will ever happen anytime soon. My point in saying all this is I really do think, in retrospect, the more that Francis, holds out, and the more that he, kind of sits around and waits for the right opportunity, I think the more and more of the MMA community is going to look at him as an afterthought. And that's a real shame, just considering what his meteoric rise did for the heavyweight division. And I truly think if he doesn't make a move sooner rather than later, assuming that it is what the PFL's reports are slowly pointing to, I think Francis's career, with him not getting any younger, is gonna take a massive hit, because now he's already lost over a year of competition. He didn't get the biggest fight, arguably in UFC heavyweight history, one of the biggest fights in UFC history. And I just think overall, this is one of those things where I just think Francis needs to look in the mirror, say, look, this is what I'm worth. Obviously, that I can't have the leverage that I've been looking for over a year, and I just think he needs to sign a contract, because if he doesn't sign a contract, he's going to keep holding out, and quite frankly, it's only going to affect him negatively, not positively.
This report from Helwani and others change anything that you said last week?
No, it doesn't. I think we're still back in the same discussion that we were in a week ago, regardless of what dollar amount Francis Ngannou's opponents want, which is great, more power to him. He's now going to be able to have the leverage to do that. But again, the issue that comes in, and the issue that I don't think Ariel was really touching on, more so, I don't know if it's because he doesn't want to or what his deal is. And don't get me wrong, I like him. I'm glad that he's able to give us these nuggets. But it's like, Ariel, who is Francis Ngannou realistically going to fight if it's not someone within the UFC at his same level? Who is he? Who's he going to fight? I mean, is the guy that he mentioned in the clip even? Is he even a mainstream star? Like, I didn't know who that was until he even brought him up. I had to look him up to see who he was. I didn't know who he was. So my point in saying that is, like, are people really going to pay? Are people going to shell out ESPN Plus pay-per-view money to watch Francis Ngannou versus Greg Hardy? Is that really what this has come to? Like, I don't understand. Again, like I keep saying, and I'm going to keep saying it until he makes a move, which we assume is going to be with the PFL at this point, as far as what reports are suggesting. But that still doesn't change the fact, who is he going to fight? That's a draw that people care about. That's exciting. That's going to give him the best possible fight. Because if you can't find that fighter, what are we doing here? I understand he wants all these things, and he wants, like, better support for the fighters and more flexibility as an independent contractor. I get all of that. But when you're the champion and you have leverage the way that he has leverage, you should want to fight the best fighters.
A lot of people have still talked about that Francis Ngannou. I see the term being thrown around on social media, fumbling the bag. Obviously, this pretty much shuts the door dead on any chance that we're going to get Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. But you look at this kind of deal that Francis Ngannou got, and kind of like you were saying before, Zan, it seems like, everything that, I don't know if I should say everything, but certain things that he was looking for, where, everybody was told that he was crazy, the PFL just goes, done.
I think I look at it from several different perspectives. So I'm going to try to break it down the best I can in kind of three parts. Part one is the fact that Francis Ngannou is now walking away from presumably the biggest fight in UFC heavyweight history and one of the biggest fights in UFC history. That's part one. Whether you like it or not, that fight was more so a dream than a reality for much of the last 3 years. Like, it's a fight that everyone wanted to see, but knew that there had to be a lot of moving parts for it to happen. The second side of this whole thing is that Francis got exactly what he wanted. The only thing you can be is happy for him at this point, just because he's waited over a year and a half for something like this. Francis was just waiting for the egg to crack, and after UFC 270, it finally did. Well, his ACL and his knee and whatnot was a bit of an issue. The fact of the matter is that Francis was really just waiting for that moment for the UFC to say "I give," which that was the beginning of the end. Side three, to answer the third part of your question, of course this is big for the PFL. This is without question the most important day, or the most important few days, rather, based on the time of when this is being released to our audience in company histories. But the biggest question is A, who is Francis Ngannou going to fight first in MMA? And B, how the heck is PFL going to sell this as if it is the biggest fight in
The
heavyweight history.
same man who is going to be promoting a BMF title fight in a couple of months. This is the same man who booked CM Punk twice on pay-per-view. Zan, this is the man behind Power Slap. We don't do gimmick fights here.
Yeah, well, Dana White's gonna Dana White, I guess. I personally think to start, there are a couple sides to this, and they're gonna hate me for this, but part of Dana I agree with, and part of Dana I don't agree with. So let me start with the part I don't agree with. Number one, the gimmicky type of fights comment. Sorry, that's a tongue twister. The gimmicky type fights comment is a bunch of BS, and I'll explain why.
I know how to explain why, Zan. I know how to
No,
explain
no.
Two words.
Okay, go ahead.
2 words. Jake Paul.
Yeah, I mean Jake Paul isn't even in the UFC, and that's what we're talking about. That's what he was driving for a year. He loved talking about him, and then all of this, I think he didn't want to talk about him anymore for reasons unbeknownst to both of us. Part I agree with is he's right. It doesn't make sense. They're giving him a deal to basically sit out for a year where you don't even know if he's going to box or not. And as I was alluding to a week ago, are we really going to shell out $75 to watch him fight Greg Hardy or Fabricio Verdum or an 8-0 heavyweight that I've never heard of? I mean, I'm sorry, but that part of the deal still ruffles some feathers with me. I feel like if you're going to sign with an MMA promotion, you gotta start your deal at some point. It's like you want to keep waiting around for a boxing match. You don't know if any of the guys you want to fight are ready. Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder. That's the part that doesn't make sense to me. And quite frankly, it doesn't make sense to Dana. This feels like the biggest season probably since season 1. And I'm not even understating it. This really does feel like a massive, tough season and almost an evolution of the show, because now you're getting it on not just ESPN Plus, but the big ESPN, if you will, the cable version of the biggest sports network in America and arguably all over the world.
I mean, would you say this season has more hype around it than Conor's first time on Tough when he coached alongside Uriah Faber, which I think was season 22?
I would say so, and the reason why I say that is just because he's had this 2-year layoff. He just had the Netflix documentary. Chandler's been calling him out for the better part of 2 years, saying that, oh, you should be my return fight, and now it's looking more and more plausible. So, I mean, I think this has all the makings to be a very successful show, not just fight-wise and the fights being great, but the ratings and all the drama around everything that's going to happen in each episode is going to be very, very fun. And you're going to get, we're going to go into the cast in just a bit here, but you're going to get a mix of veterans, and we're going to get a mix of guys who are still working their way up into the UFC. So it's going to be almost a miniature version of, to me, it feels like a season 1, but it also feels like season 4, the comeback, where you're kind of getting a mixture of both, and they're all kind of colliding together. And from the videos that we've already seen just briefly of the excerpts that are being put out, it already looks like a very, very interesting season. Yeah, all I have to say about this is who cares? It was just a clip to get clicks for every single site that wrote about it, and I hope the Heat mascot is okay, and we can let bygones be bygones. So I will say, even though this is a headline on our show based on the tenets of journalism, I do not consider this a news story.
I think it's a story just for the fact that it's Conor. Again, something has gone wrong and it involves him. It's just like, same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was.
No doubt about it.
Do I need to play the full song?
No, because it gets more and more annoying with every lyric.
And you'll find yourself saying, "This is not my beautiful octagon."
He hasn't been found
guilty of any of the sexual assault, but you look at that history and the stuff that he has done, and it's like, how much more can he continue to get away with? And then, as I kind of made an allusion to this last week, but Conor McGregor wasn't really in the headline. We weren't really talking about Conor McGregor, but how much the UFC, and by stretch, this is what I referred to when I talked about last week, Zan, how much the commissions allow him to get away with. Do you remember when Mike Tyson bit Vander Holyfield's ear, and they actually banned Mike Tyson from the sport? They actually revoked his license for biting a person's ear inside the ring. Now, granted, Tyson had spent some time in jail earlier, but you look at all this history, it's like you said, Dan, how much more is Conor McGregor going to be allowed to get away with?
Yeah, and you bring up the Tyson example, and that's great. You're aging me just a little bit, because I was not alive when that incident took place. But of course, I've heard about it. And when you're going to take down the biggest star in boxing at the time and revoke his license for something that egregious, which is what Nevada should have done, that's part of their job. It leads me to question that almost 30 years later, they're not doing the same thing with MMA's biggest star. It's like, you would think that after all those incidents that McGregor would either be banned from fighting in the state of Nevada, or be suspended from fighting in the state of Nevada for an extended period of time. It's given everything the biggest figure in the sport, so he feels like he can get away with anything. And it's very interesting, because to me, he's the only fighter that I could say with confidence is bigger than the whole sport, just because of the attention that he draws, and he can do anything, and people will gravitate towards it, read about it, watch it, whatever it may be. I think it's going to be one of those things where this is going to be brushed under the rug, and it's probably going to be some sort of money dispute or something like that. This is just a guess. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but to me, it's starting to go down on that route with more information that's coming out about the story changing and whatnot. So again, I don't know. I'm not saying that he is or isn't guilty, but what I am saying is, it seems like all parties involved are doing all they can to protect him in such a way that way, A, he doesn't get in trouble, and that way, B, he can still continue to fight. We're going to get into the fight aspect of this in a few minutes, but to me, that's the route I could see this going down 100%. Or it could have been more people in there to diffuse it instead of just the one guy, if that makes sense.
Definitely, Zan. I think this is a horrific look for the Miami Heat and their security team. I think this is a really bad look for Conor McGregor.
This is also a bad look for the NBA too, because the NBA prides themselves on making sure that the playoffs and the NBA finals are run as smoothly as possible. And obviously, this didn't come out until a week after Game 4, if I'm not mistaken. So I think this is also a bad part on the league itself, because they're the ones who are granting these celebrities access into their venue, especially, and it is the NBA Finals, and they could have done a better job to make sure that that both parties were in their separate areas, and how they even connected, to me, is the part that's super questionable. And then you have the video afterward of the alleged victim at a club an hour after the
with Conor.
Yeah, that's really bizarre.
That is true, Zan. Then this season of Tough, especially if Valiev beats Wells later today on Tough, then Zan, at this point, Tough is just a waste. I'm sorry, but if this fight does not happen and we continue on that path where Conor's a sideshow like we talked about, and Chandler just continues to wipe the floor with him and with his team in these first round matches, then Tough's a waste.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm gonna hold out hope and still say that the McGregor Chandler fight's gonna happen. I'm gonna go on the assumption now that Conor McGregor will get the Brock Lesnar treatment. He will get the exemption, because why the heck not at this point? No one really cares anymore. I think he's going to get the exemption. They're not just going to book the T-Mobile Arena for the end of the year and not have some sort of massive main event. I think if it isn't Conor, the entire UFC 295 card is a bust in my humble opinion.
All right, Zan. So now we move on into the summer, and we still had a little bit of McGregor Chandler talk about tough going on at the time. Obviously, we have tough enough going on at this point, but the big story, Zan, uh, at this point becomes Musk versus Zuck, which
Yeah, so the big billionaire celebrity fight that did not take place that ruled the internet for like 2 weeks did not occur. For those of you who have been living under a rock, it would have been Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg. There were rumors about that fight taking place at the Roman Coliseum of all places. There were talks of that fight, being a $100 pay-per-view and being the biggest fight in human history, all until injuries and excuses forced the fight to no longer materialize. But it seems like every single time Dane has been asked about it, he either says I don't know, or he smiles, which gives me an indication that he's still pushing as hard as he can to make the fight happen.
Well, wasn't it Musk who like basically went on Twitter and said, "Yeah, we're not gonna have the UFC. We're not gonna have Dana White involved," which is funny
Yeah.
because the day after, I think it was like the day after, the Zuck versus Musk started to try and come to fruition. The shirts got published by the UFC and all of that. And if you remember, Elon Musk's mommy went on social media and said, "Yeah, I don't want this fight to happen."
Yeah, and not only what's even more dumb about of that is the shirts are still public on the UFC store's website.
Oh, jeez. Uh, but then on a little bit of a sour note, a little bit of a sour note in that summer, it was starting, we had the whispers, which turned into a real talk. And then at this point comes the shouts that 2023, one way or another, whether it be through folding, whether it be through acquisition, whether it be through some other means by Viacom, 2023 was going to be the end of Bellator MMA.
Yeah, as we knew it under the Viacom banner. And thankfully, for those of you who have followed the show, I went to two of the final four Bellator events under the Viacom banner. Those were Bellator 297 and Bellator 301. And at the time of 297, if you would have told me months later that Bellator would have been done, I don't think I would have believed it. But Bellator 301, as we're going to talk about later on in the show, there was so much uncertainty. But I guess to put it lightly, I would say the month of June was more so centered around Bellator because they brought a major card to Chicago in the middle of June, and that was just one of those cards where I think Bellator did a tremendous job of just promoting the heck out of it. There was a lot of Chicago talent on that card. There were some excellent fights on that card, especially the co-main and main event, and there was just I think there was a lot of excitement about Bellator around that particular point during a time when the UFC was kind of going through a lull. The June pay-per-view wasn't great, and there were concerns about what was going to happen in July or August. But as we quickly moved closer to the MMA calendar only got a little hotter, and then even and then even then some as we got into the month of July, because we just did so many different events that month that it was just unbelievable. Honestly, you could argue that the entire summer was one of the best MMA summers in several years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we definitely talked about it. For more information about that summer, go back last week. We talked about a lot of it with the MMA Outsiders 2023 awards. Uh, but other talking points from the summer, we had Colby basically making an accusation that Jon Jones was keeping him off the UFC 295 card because we were looking for answers at that time. Kind
And
of
he's
throwing
still
the
and he's still is making those same accusations to this very day, even though he lost.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say he's still making excuses after losing to Leon Edwards in one of the worst fights of this year, probably one of the worst title fights in UFC history. Um, but you know what? It's funny because I threw a theory out there at the time, Zan, about could they be doing this as a means of having a fight if McGregor Chandler doesn't come to fruition in December? And well, surprise, surprise, like I said, we're still waiting for McGregor Chandler to happen.
Yep.
So it exactly played out like that. And then, Zan, we did have a little concern about ESPN Plus subscription pricing increases, if the pay-per-views were going to do that too. We broke that because you were on a phone call with ESPN Plus representatives trying to basically get a refund.
Yeah, so just to clarify that whole story, I was not calling as a journalist. I simply called the ESPN Plus support line and just wanted to ask some questions. This was like near the end of the summer, early fall, and I was like, hey, like it's getting to that time of year again where you guys, come out and say, oh, we're going to increase the prices. And I got a bit of bad news considering that the prices were going to go up starting in the middle of November. And thankfully, and unfortunately, they did. Thankfully, the UFC prices did not, but I just kind of called and just said, hey, I'm a loyal subscriber. I've been a subscriber since the beginning of the service. Is there anything I can do to prove that I've been a member for this many years and to show that, maybe I could get a couple discounts every once in a while on these various pay-per-views? And then, I asked about, because at that point, the Tyson Fury Francis Ngannou fight had been announced, and they were able to give me a price point for that. And once I heard that price point, I now can't remember what it was. I think it might have been $84.98 or something. But whenever I heard that price point, I literally gasped. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And that's when I told you, like, hey, like I called the ESPN Plus support line. It doesn't look good. Like I would consider canceling your subscription. Like everything they told me just seemed like they were going to jack the prices. And although they did for the whole service, they thankfully didn't for the pay-per-views, as you'll find out later on in the stream. But yeah.
Yeah. And then, Zen, you know what else we had in summer? All the talk about Logan Paul versus Dillon Danis, and you saying that the fight wasn't going to happen. It ultimately does, and Zan, I think you and I can agree. We wish it never happened in the first place.
We wish this fight never happened, and technically, well, honestly, you could really say it kind of didn't happen, considering how horrible the fight was. There wasn't an actual fight that took place.
That stretches into quarter 4, so people will see our reactions to that fight then. But for now,
sure.
take a look at all the quarter 3, the summer MMA Outsiders best of clips.
And we don't do gimmick fights in the UFC.
It's just not what we do here. It's just not what we do.
Francis Ngannou wants to go, into boxing. He wants to do a cross-promotional fight, but that's gimmick fight. Pay no attention to the fact that our biggest star ever did a crossover fight. No.
Well, not to mention the fact that the UFC has contradicted themselves over and over and over again. Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. We have CM Punk versus Mickey Gall, CM Punk versus Mike Jackson, which
you were there for live,
which I was there for live and in person for. It is the worst fight I've ever seen in person. and then of course you have to go back to the infamous Randy Couture versus James Toney fight from 13 years ago. So you want to talk about gimmick fights? The UFC has been the definition of doing at least one gimmick fight every 5 or 6 years.
It's quite frankly, I mean, Zan, I get it. We should be used to Dana White talking out of his ass at this point.
Of course, but I think that he thinks that it isn't a gimmick fight because he knows how much money it'll generate. So
you're saying. Hold on, I know what you're gonna do. Let me pull the ETV thing. You're saying it's all about the money.
Yeah.
You know what I could totally see happening?
What could you see?
That Zuckerberg versus Musk is the co-main event to a UFC. The co-main event to a fight that more people would want to see. Say a Jon Jones fight or a Conor fight, just to kind of, so just for Dana to say, if you want to pay for that, if you want to, watch that fight, you have to pay for that fight, you got to watch this too.
It's a good point. Could you see this happening on UFC 300 if we're really considering that this fight might happen?
Don't speak it into existence. Oh, no.
This is actually a thing. So apparently, Elon Musk's mom doesn't want him to fight.
Really?
Yeah, but May Musk, this is Elon Musk's mother, says, and now the fight has been canceled. Great relief. So apparently his mommy doesn't want him to fight in any way.
Really?
Yeah.
That is hilarious. So what is more likely to happen? Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk or Tom Cruise versus Justin Bieber? What are we talking about? I just think this is so funny that we're talking about this when Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones is right here.
We have Francis Ngannou, Jon Jones doing a stare down last week, and now it's all about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. What is this world?
When you have the biggest heavyweight fight ever and it's not happening, it's so disappointing.
I mean, Zan, it was also just a week or two ago. We were talking about, hey, Jon Jones and Ngannou may not happen, but maybe we'll get Francis Ngannou versus Deontay Wilder in one or both sports. And again, no. Now, 2 weeks later, we're talking about Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk.
Yeah, sure enough. And we'll see if this even goes anywhere. But Dana wants to do it, and he's already making T-shirts. So
Dana wants to do it, but Elon Musk's mommy doesn't want him to do it.
This is just another day of Conor McGregor being Conor McGregor again. And it's not news about when he's fighting next. It's news about other things that he's doing.
I get it. Conor's always the headline, but it's just, at this point now, Zan, I'll believe this fight happens when I see it. The more that we go with no word on a fight, the less likely I'm believing that this fight actually happens. And the more I believe that report from a couple weeks ago that he has no interest in fighting Chandler.
So you'll believe it when they step on the scale, or you'll believe it when they actually fight?
When they step on the scale.
Okay.
And then again, Sam, it goes back to the rant that I had at the end of the last Tough Enough, which Nick has already informed me that he wants to post everywhere. If McGregor has no interest in fighting Chandler, then do us all a favor and just retire for good.
You're not wrong in saying that, although it would kind of make me sad because I would really like to see him fight one more time. I think it'd be cool, but still,
I would as well. Just under, I
just want to see it.
Presenting such a good opportunity right here for this, and if Conor really has no interest, then like I said, then Tough is the biggest waste.
I just want to see Conor McGregor win. I'm sick of watching him.
I didn't say that. I just want to give him the chance to compete again.
No, I know, but I'm saying personally that I want to see Conor McGregor win another fight before he actually retires.
It's the end of an era for sure. We know it's going to be the end of an era. We just don't know if it's the end of an era with PFL taking over and they run the two promotions separate, a la a UFC and Strikeforce before Strikeforce closed, a la the original plans, quote unquote, before it all fell through with UFC and Pride, or if this is just going to be a thing where PFL absorbs them, all the fighters and such into promotion, and Bellator is potentially no more.
Yeah, if this were to happen, this would be an end of an era for parts of our careers, for you and for I, is for a lot of the Bellator fighters that you and I have interacted with over the years. This is how we and many other MMA media personalities and journalists got our start, was by going to these Bellator events and talking to these fighters. So this is a very interesting development, and it's certainly interesting because I think, this is seriously no bias, that Bellator has the best PR team in all of MMA. So it will be interesting to see how this is swiftly handled. I really do hope it is your first option that you presented, which is them running separately, but them having some sort of a partnership. But I could also see the other side where PFL just absorbs them, which clearly, if that were to happen, then they would be clearly the number 2 MMA promotion in the world, if they aren't already, with all of their newest acquisitions. Honestly, I could also, seeing it be a situation where, maybe Scott Coker and Ray Seppo have a deal, or Don Davis, if you will, and it could also just be a library purchase similar to what the UFC and Pride's relationship ended up being. I think there's a lot of avenues as to which it could go, regardless of what does happen. Though the day that this news like fully does materialize, it'll be a monumental day in the world of MMA.
Bellator 300 is not definite, but it is likely. They're trying to make it happen. They're reaching out to fighters. They're trying to do, the matchmakers are doing their thing. Bellator's doing their thing. There have been talks of Ryan Bader and Linton Vassell headlining the card, main event, heavyweight championship fight, a fight that a lot of fans have been anticipating for a long time. That would be a great one. Of course, Patchy Mix and Sergio Pettis, interim champion. That one makes sense. It's likely to be on that card if this does happen. And then another one that wasn't included in the article, but not as definite as the other two, but Jeremy Kennedy, he's the number one contender for that featherweight strap. Patricio Pitbull, of course, one of the all-time Bellator greats, the incumbent, the champion. That one could be added as well, considering Patricio Pitbull's name value, especially considering the fact that it could be the last event ever. Who better to be on that last card than Patricio Pitbull? So from what I'm hearing, when I published this article, it was like 75% chance that this Bellator 300 card happens. From what I'm hearing since publishing the article, my Rush MMA calculator has the event being at 90% likely to happen. I think I would be willing to put my eggs in the basket. I think Bellator 300 is going to go down. I didn't say it concretely in the article, but I believe PFL will be the ones to purchase Bellator when it's all said and done. I think that will be announced in the next 2 months, I'd say. I'm not definite on that, just like nobody's definite on anything regarding this. I mean, like, only a few people in the world really know what's going to happen, how it's going to look. But I will say that if PFL does purchase Bellator, less than half of the Bellator roster would be coming over to PFL. The rest would become free agents, which is unfortunate. You never want to see, a bunch of fighters unemployed looking for work. If they're able to put together a 300th event, it would be the best for the fighters, for the fans, for the organization. Let's go out on a bang. 15-year run, remarkable run, so many different champions, so many great fight nights. I would love to see. I don't want to see Bellator come to an end. But if it is going to come to an end, if it is imminent, if it's inevitable, I would love to see them go out on a bang with a big card with numerous championship fights. Why 2? Why not 3? Why not 4?
And he expects that this would be the biggest sellout fight in the history of combat sports.
Well, you want to talk about big money? This is big on every single billboard in the world. I mean, and you want to talk about masculinity at its finest. This would be the so-called definition of it. 2 Americans fighting in a non-American country in front of the entire world, potentially on the X platform. There's nothing bigger and more spectacle-less, if you will, than a fight like this. This is no surprise coming from Dana White, considering that he was just in Italy for about a week. And actually, for those who don't know, he's such a sick degenerate that he actually brought a casino to him. So this is coming as no surprise at all that he wants to do something as wacky as this fight, and he wants to do it in Italy, probably because he was so sucked into the Italy vibe that he's like, screw it, let's just make the fight in Italy, and let's try to pretend that we're back in the pre-AD era, if you will. And quite frankly, just reading this headline, this is something out of like a Percy Jackson book or something like that. You wouldn't think that just reading this headline at first glance was a real possibility, but it actually is.
It's like, am I actually reading The Onion? Did I hit the wrong site?
Yeah, no kidding.
Nevertheless, I mean, I'm not going to talk trash about my Italian heritage. So, I mean, Zan, I have for the longest time stated I would love to have a UFC card in Italy. I just didn't think I would have an Italy UFC card that is main evented by 2, well, let's face it, non-fighters. 2, like a white collar bout is basically what this would be. Where did Dillon Danis come from? Why is he? The last time I saw Dillon Danis fight Zan was like 2019.
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, Dillon Danis likes to talk a lot of shit, and he likes to talk a lot of shit very late at night on the internet, and his mouth got him what he wanted apparently, and this is going to be the spectacle of overblown spectacles that you have ever seen, and this will probably be the biggest joke of a boxing match that we will see this entire year. I will say this: if Logan Paul loses to Dillon Danis, A, I will laugh my ass off, and B, Logan Paul should think about retiring and continuing to just do his impulsive podcast, because no one will be willing to fight him unless it's for millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So I'm going to go out on a limb and not even make a pick on this fight, because I think this fight is going to get canceled 2 weeks before it's supposed to happen.
Now, supposedly, Hasim Rahman might be the backup for Dillon Danis. At least that's what Morgeson told me from what he saw on social media.
Yeah, I actually think that's a more entertaining fight than Paul and Danis. And I know I'd sit in the minority, but I actually like Hasim Rahman Jr. And that's a fight that I would be really interested in and would invest myself in watching a weekend if that ends up being the fight.
So, Zan, so much for Musk and Zuck. Sucks to suck, I should say.
Yeah, and sucks to suck if you were one of the suckers that bought the T-shirt. I was not one of them. But yeah, I mean, what can I really say? I don't really care if it was going to happen. I would have been very excited about it. If it wasn't going to happen, it wasn't going to change my life forever. So to be quite honest with you, I don't really care about this. At this point, with how confusing the story's gotten, I kind of just wanted to go away.
I didn't get into the fight media game to cover Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. I came to cover fighters.
Mm-hmm. As did many of us. I'll be honest. I would have been down to totally cover that, but that's just me being nuts and me liking other sports and crossover and pop culture. But for those that are strictly MMA, I can understand the disdain as to why you wouldn't want to cover something like that. But if that was me or other people, I'm sure feel the same way as me, I would have totally loved to cover that.
I still would have covered it. I just wouldn't have been a big fan of the whole spectacle, if you know what I mean. Fair or foul, because I could totally see Jones only doing this because we talked about how Jones-Stipe, this could be the retirement fight for either of them. And I guess maybe he's concerned that Colby and the way that he is at press conferences and his, character, I guess character is the best word for his in-cage appearances might cause a bit of a stir because, Colby would bring up Jon Jones's criminal history.
Yeah, and he would probably make fun of them going back to their days as collegiate roommates too.
Yeah,
I'm sure that it would get ugly really fast, and although it might end up being one of the most entertaining press conferences of all time, which we would lose out on, unfortunately, it would be like a top 5 UFC press conference ever. I think it makes sense from the champion's perspective that he wouldn't want a distraction like Colby Covington on the card, just considering how big the heavyweight title fight is, and they want to reserve that as much as they can. So it makes total sense.
Also, I totally see this. I also can totally see this, and in the perspective of, well, you know what? We talked about, months ago when we started to have our doubts about Conor and Chandler. We're like, oh, are they going to move Jones-Stipe off of the Garden then to Las Vegas? But now, come to think of it, with this story coming out, if it's true, Conor and Chandler isn't going to happen, is there a chance, and they even talked about it on the pay-per-view, is there a chance, does that mean Leon Colby as either a main or a co-main for 296 in Vegas?
It could very well be possible, and I know you don't want to hear it, but I have to ask this question anyway. If somehow, some way, Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic pulls out of this fight, what does the UFC do?
I would assume, even though it's Jones-Stipe and you want to run that fight, I feel like for 295, you're going to have to get Pavlovich as the backup fighter.
You were not calling as a journalist. You were, this is not us as journalists talking about this. And you told me that you were calling
because you called number one, you called the ESPN Plus support line. You didn't call Bristol. And number two, you were just calling because you were basically threatening to cancel ESPN Plus.
ESPN just continues to raise the prices every single month, it seems like, and almost on a yearly occurrence for the UFC. And I just said, hey, look, I've been a subscriber for this many years. Is there any way you can give me either a discount on the current plan that I have, or can you tell me anything about potential bundles coming out? And unfortunately, I got an answer to both of them. I got no answer, meaning an answer of no to both of those. But I got word that starting October 12th, ESPN Plus is going to raise the prices again for the bundle of Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus to $23.99 a month. Currently, if you pay for the bundle, you pay $19.99 a month in the United States. And that just really rubbed me the wrong way, because I remember when I first purchased this back in January of 2019, the service was $4.99 a month. And to see either this bundle has gone up by almost $30 or almost $20 rather, is downright saddening to me, just considering how loyal I've been to them for several years and really subscribing to it for the sole purpose of watching the UFC and boxing pay-per-views in the last several years. It just bummed me out to no end, and I'm like just genuinely frustrated, because it's like, if you want to draw in new fans to the service, people that don't know much about the service, people that are just starting to get into streaming, to me, this is not the way to do it. And this isn't to rip on the gentleman I was speaking to. I know he was just doing his job, but to hear that, the prices are going to increase and it's going to affect all the subscribers, regardless of how you use it, just really bummed me out to no end. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could say about this is, and I'm just going to say it, so I apologize for the language here, but this is becoming a shit show. And the only thing I can really say is, don't hold your breath, because October 14th, the scheduled fight between Logan Paul and Dillon Danis, don't expect it to occur. If I'm DAZN, I'm already in PR disaster mode. I'm already figuring out a way that I can salvage the card somehow, some way. So if you're interested in the Dillon Danis Logan Paul fight, I would not bake on that occurring, given all of the legal proceedings that are going on. And I think the biggest loser in this whole thing is actually DAZN, because now they have to deal with all the crap that's going to come along with all of this. So or you go another after DAZN takes 2 steps forward, as they usually do, they take 3 steps back, and this is just the latest in that ongoing saga. So
I can't wait, Zan, to see if we ever get the numbers about whatever the Canelo pay-per-view, the Canelo fight is going to be at the end of the month. I mean, Zan, really, this whole thing is, you kind of said it, it's a shit show. It's a shit show of
emotional damage.
That's basically what this feud between Logan Paul and Dillon Danis has become. And
wait, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought Canelo versus Charlo was just a PBC show.
Oh, maybe it is just a PBC. My point, Zan, my point is that, as you kind of alluded to, DAZN just continues to take step backward after step backward, and they are really showing, Zan, that they are second in competition to ESPN Plus with the UFC PFL. Zan, I'll be pretty honest. If I start to cut some corners, and remove some subscription, DAZN might be number 1 at this point, because honestly, they might be the most expensive one, but there's no bang for your buck with them. All right, Zan. Now onto the fall. And we had a very busy fall. And October, Zan, I mean, came out with some absolute fire. So we just got off of the Paul Danis stuff. And, well, as we kind of alluded to, the Paul Danis fight ends up being, I think, one of the biggest embarrassments to the sport, to boxing and just to combat sports in absolutely general. And I don't know. I don't think I ever want to see Dillon Danis compete in combat sports ever again.
No, and this is rare that I say this. I think you speak for 100% of the combat sports community. Literally, that's how poorly he performed against Logan Paul.
I don't know if I can say 100% because obviously you're going to have his supporters and you're going to have, the Irish fan base who will always
I
support guys like
I
McGregor
guess
and
I
Danis.
guess you could argue that, but I would say for the vast majority, it's the other way.
I
Though.
would think so. I would think so. And DAZN being a big loser, and Zen, as we alluded to earlier, the day we're recording this is the day before Day of Reckoning, and once again, you can purchase a DAZN card, pay-per-view card on ESPN. So they're probably just not gonna be, nothing more than just an amoeba that attaches on to ESPN at this point.
Yeah, unfortunately, and as you alluded to, I think it was several weeks ago that you are officially canceling your DAZN subscription because of it, and rightfully so. I mean, if DAZN is just going to be a partner with ESPN Plus, then what is really the point?
Yeah, at least, I get it maybe for international service, but here in the US, it's basically nothing at this point.
Right.
Uh and it's even sadder, Zan, when you consider what could have been, and it's even sadder when you consider something else we started to talk about in Q4 and we followed throughout Q4, the end of Showtime Sports. Not just the boxing front, not just Bellator, considering that Bellator was we talked about the Bellator acquisition, which we also talked about in Q4, but just Showtime Sports, period. Boxing, MMA, NFL, NBA, it's over.
Yes, yeah, Showtime Sports as we know it is over, and for both of us who followed combat sports on the network, it's definitely going to be a very interesting transition, just considering that HBO died 5 years ago, and now 5 years later, Showtime also died. So it's like we're now officially moving into almost a new technological millennium of sorts, where everything is going to streaming, and now with the PBC going over to Amazon Prime, I think it officially begins that new era of streaming, and only that. Because if you think about it now, the only TV network in the United States that's carrying professional boxing is ESPN, which is crazy to think about, like a literal television network. You don't see Fox putting on boxing matches anymore. It's literally only ESPN, which is just very interesting, and something that it's not only very interesting, but it's something that if I would have been told that a couple years ago, I don't think I would have believed it.
No. And as I mentioned, we talk more about what the future of Bellator could hold, stretching into Bellator 301, where you talk about your experience about all the uncertainty that's there and how the card plays out, and then all the rumors until eventually it becomes confirmation that beginning with 2024, the PFL will be operating Bellator and will hold 8 cards, and now we know we'll hold 8 cards a year internationally, Bellator International Champion Series. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what the Bellator looks like under the PFL, but it is kind of sad to see Bellator as an independent promotion going away.
Yeah, and I still have not been told whether or not I'm still going to be a rankings analyst, or well, the Bellator rankings analyst will move over into being PFL panelist, but that remains to be seen.
We also talk about, and just looking at some of the other things on here, McGregor rejoining the USADA pool, only for an announcement to come out that the in a statement to come out from USADA themselves that the UFC USADA partnership was dissolving.
Yeah, that was a wild story, and you knew it was a wild story. Not only you had Jeff Novinsky speaking to the media, but also Hunter Campbell. You know that when Hunter Campbell speaks, that it's something very serious, and that was when Dana made his infamous, iconic comment towards Travis Tigard that he went full Britney Spears. So that was definitely one where it was like, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's going to be a talking point as we go into 2024. And Zan, as the day that this is released, January 1st, it's the first day of a USADA-less UFC. Now, obviously, there's plans of they join up with another anti-doping agency,
Well, it's
but
called drug-free sport now, is what it's
right,
called.
drug-free sport. But it still feels weird that after all this time, all the ups and the downs of USADA, that the UFC and USADA are not partners. It feels weird.
Well, one part you're missing is its ups, downs, and questions.
Yeah,
Because
ups down
if
the
you
question. But do you think that's going to change now with drug-free sport?
probably not.
Right. That's what I feel. We also talk about the UFC's 30th anniversary. We go back to the Jon Jones stuff because Jones versus Miocic gets moved to mid 2024 because Jones gets torn pec, as I mentioned before. And then Zan, we had big boxing news. Last thing I'll make mention of here. Let me just double check. Yeah, last thing I'll make mention here. We also talk about Armin Sarukian's knockout at UFC Austin, which UFC Austin, incredible card, which we also mentioned last week. But Francis Ngannou versus Tyson Fury. The fight happening, the craziest scene. Francis Ngannou knocked down Tyson Fury, the questionable decision. And as you said, Zan, as we end 2020 and 2023, we got to give credit to Francis Ngannou for all that he's done. Plus, it seems like in early 2024, I think the date's February 17th, we're going to get Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship.
Finally, we've been waiting to see it for over a year. They tried to book it this past February. It did not happen. Thankfully, they're trying it again a year later. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you before we finally wrap up is it's something I've been thinking about the last several days since we decided we were going to record on the day that you guys are obviously seeing it New Year's Day. But the one word that I can use to describe combat sports in 2023 is simply put unpredictable. You didn't know.
Unpredictable, unbelievable. Zan, 2023, I think, is a perfect emblem of the craziness that can happen in combat sports, MMA, boxing, or otherwise.
1000%.
All right, take a look at these clips. We'll be back to wrap things up.
Should I be taking this with a grain of salt, or should I be hopeful? I can't believe I'm saying that about boxing, but hopeful.
Well, I mean, it's great that you mentioned it, and it's great that we're leading off with this because the magnitude of this fight, to me, would be an understatement to say it is massive. It is beyond massive. I mean, these are the two biggest, baddest heavyweights on the planet that have been chomping at the bit for over a year and a half to get in the ring and punch each other, and now we're less than 3 months away from potentially seeing the biggest heavyweight boxing championship fight of our lifetime, presumably. I know you're a little bit older than me, but it just feels like the countdown is on, and you can cut the tension with a knife, because if this buildup is what I think it's going to be a fight that we're never going to forget. And for the Saudis to get this fight done when they're getting it done, to say that they were going to go all in on the sport of boxing and they're living up to their promise, you have to give them a lot of credit. And to get Tyson Fury back in the ring less than 3 months after fighting Francis Ngannou in a fight that he doesn't have to necessarily compete in, but he is anyway. He's doing it for the prestige, and he's doing it because he wants to do it. This is a very, very, very interesting development in a fight that I think a lot of people are excited about, in a fight that I think a lot of the older boxing fans, the ones that haven't really been in touch with the sport for years, I think you're going to see a lot of the people, will come back.
They were trying to get the USADA exemption, and I think Dana and Conor and company realize now that if they haven't been able to get the USADA exemption, then it needed to happen this week, so that way either April 13th or April 20th, when we were discussing potential UFC 300 dates, Conor could get into the cage and fight. I think they've realized that basically their time is up, and so Conor's just going to have to go through the 6 months like everybody else.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, it sucks because, we were anticipating UFC 296, the end of the year. Like, this is going to be the perfect bookend year to a pay-per-view schedule that, I don't know about you, Tom, but this has been one of the single best years of just unbelievable pay-per-view main events that we've ever seen, and this would have topped it. I think now, even though we've waited as long as we have for Conor McGregor to return, I think it's going to make UFC 300 that much bigger. And once the card is officially announced, once the UFC decides to share the official poster, which I expect nothing less than just a masterful creation, whenever that decides to release. Once that gets revealed, I think the countdown is really going to start, and I think people are going to get really excited, because if you have Conor McGregor at the top of UFC 300, just imagine what a potential pay-per-view could look like, not just in terms of title fights, but high-level top 10 and top 5 contender fights that we've been waiting to see for over a year, and for some of them, I would assume 2 years. So I think, even though we've been pretty pissed the last few months that we haven't gotten clarity on this, I think the stars could be potentially aligning to where UFC 300 is, going to live up to the hype as the UFC is hoping it will. You just hope and pray to the MMA gods, if they do somehow exist, that Conor McGregor potentially headlining UFC 300 does not come back to bite the UFC in the ass.
Everything is turning to the streaming. I get it, but it feels like everyone is just trying to reinvent the wheel, and they're talking about, oh, the good thing about streaming is it's all a la carte. It's just what I want. But when you're looking at the pricing of everything, it's like you're going to be paying just as much as you did with cable for whatever you're going to get, plus all the pay-per-views on top of that. I mean, Zan, I have said it before on this show. I've said it before on ETV, and I'll say it again. Laugh at me and laugh at everybody all you want for promoting, in this case, Peacock, but before they integrated with Peacock, the WWE Network. But Vince McMahon and company got it right, where you should not be charging a premium for the service. It should be whatever the service price is, and then maybe a small premium, if any, or you just make it the base price, subscription price, a little more, but then your customers are not paying extra for, in the WWE's case, the premium live events, or in this case with the UFC, the pay-per-views and such.
Right, and you go back to your great point about a la carte. Tom, if it's a la carte, if I'm an ESPN Plus subscriber and I just want to watch combat sports, why can't I buy a singular package where it's just combat sports on ESPN Plus, and that's all I get? Because if it was up to me and I could have my own TV viewing experience, I would only watch 30 channels, to be honest with you, and maybe 2 streaming services, and that's it. If it was up to me.
And it's ridiculous. And you consider the economic times that we live in, Zan. I don't want to get into politics or economics on the show, and I've talked about this before. I've talked about it with UFC 295, in fact, at Madison Square Garden, with the ticket prices. You are hurting. I know Nick Borgeson likes to talk about me as you're damaging, media with how much they got to pay. I just think, Zan, it's not just me. The customers. You are damaging the middle class and poor customers.
That as much as, I was pissed by what Conor did, that this week also proved, as we said time and time again, that, as much as Dana White will try not to say it, Conor McGregor is certainly bigger than the UFC. And here's why. So the UFC and USADA both verified the report. Conor McGregor is back in the USADA pool. He is going to compete in 2024. The question here, Zan, is when, and not because of, typical Conor McGregor, which we've been writing on for weeks. It is because the UFC-USADA partnership will be no more effective January 1st. As a result, according to a statement from USADA, of the whole saga involving Conor McGregor. USADA then releases a statement which is pretty damning, which the UFC is threatening legal action, but USADA is standing by it. And now Drug Free Sport International, which serves, various different sports leagues throughout the United States, the MLB, the NFL, will be the new UFC anti-doping partner, and they basically will not do, according to them, some of the stuff that we've ragged on about USADA for, doing the random drug test during a weight cut, or doing the random drug test at like 4 a.m, or I think to when Demetrius Johnson had USADA knocking on his door during a live stream on Twitch.
Yeah, that's one of the most iconic USADA blenders that we've ever seen. But I guess before we dive deep into this,
I guess we shall, right?
Yes, please read it.
Okay, it's a long one. We can confirm that Conor McGregor has re-entered the USADA testing pool as of Sunday, October 8th, 2023. We have been clear and firm with the UFC that there should be no exception given by the UFC for McGregor to fight until he has returned 2 negative tests and been in the pool for at least 6 months. The rules also allow USADA to keep someone in the testing pool longer before competing based on their declarations upon entry into the pool and testing results. Unfortunately, we do not currently know whether the UFC will ultimately honor the 6-month or longer requirement because as of January 1st, 2024, USADA will no longer be involved with the UFC anti-doping program. Despite a positive and productive meeting about a contract renewal in May of 2023, the UFC did an about-face and informed USADA on Monday, October 9th, that it was going in a different direction. We are disappointed for UFC athletes who are independent contractors who rely on our independent, gold standard global program to protect their rights to a clean, safe, and fair octagon. The UFC's move imperils the immense progress made within the sport under USADA's leadership. The relationship between USADA and UFC became untenable given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principal stance that McGregor be not allowed to fight without being in the testing pool for at least 6 months. One UFC commentator echoed this, recently declaring that USADA should not oversee the UFC program since we held firm to the 6-month rule involving McGregor, and since we do not allow fighters without an approved medical basis to use performance-enhancing drugs like experimental, unapproved peptides or testosterone for healing or injury simply to get back into the octagon. Fighters' long-term health and safety, in addition to a fair and level playing field, are more important to USADA than short-term profits at the expense of clean athletes. USADA is proud of the work we've done over the past 8 years to clean up the UFC, and we will continue to provide our unparalleled service to UFC athletes for the remainder of our current contract, which ends December 31st, 2023. As always, we will continue to uphold the rights and voices of clean athletes in all sport. Pretty damning, I'd say.
In one of the most pathetic freak showish displays that we've ever seen. You didn't pay for it. I didn't pay for it. We both watched it thanks to this thing called the internet, and unfortunately, it did not go.
Zan, you watched it that way. I didn't even watch it. I watched the highlights afterwards.
You didn't even watch it.
Yeah, and the highlights.
I didn't realize you didn't even. I didn't even realize you didn't even watch it.
No, I didn't even watch it. Zan, when I say the word highlights, I think that's a word that is a bit of an overestimation, because what highlights were there really in this fight? Zan, Dillon Danis threw 72 punches over the course of like 7 rounds or so.
Yep, 72 punches, and most of them were the wimpiest punches you've ever seen. So.
I mean, the way Dillon Danis fought, it was almost like, you ever see one of those, like on TVs where it's the typical nerd kind of fight, you're just, nah!
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, I guess Jimmy Smith said it best yesterday on Unlocking the Cage on Sirius XM, and he put it straight. He goes, Dillon Danis did not look like he, A, was prepared to be in there, or B, deserved to be in there. The one part that you didn't mention, which I gladly will, is think about the network that Jake Paul was fighting on. It's a network that you and I have criticized over the last 6 to 8 months at their lack of proper promotion. And trust me, if he was on anything other than DAZN, I think he would be a bigger star than what he currently is, just because DAZN gets in its own way.
Well, also remember, ESPN, this was, again, where in the last day or two, all of a sudden it becomes, now it's a DAZN on ESPN Plus, DAZN on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. So that way, if you have ESPN Plus, you can watch the pay-per-view too. So it's kind of like, what's the point? Because ESPN Plus and DAZN are supposed to be rivals. When it's something like Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury, yeah, I understand it. If you remember, Zan, back in the day, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather, 2015, HBO and Showtime both came together for that. There have been a couple of occasions where HBO and Showtime have put their rivalry aside to give boxing fans options for purchasing pay-per-views. But in the case of ESPN Plus and DAZN here, where it's for almost everything at this point, including a Logan Paul Dillon Danis freak show fight which wasn't even the main event. It's the co-main event to KSI and Tommy Fury. Zan, at this point, to me, that's DAZN tipping its cap to, in the words of baseball legend Pedro Martinez, tipping its cap to ESPN Plus and calling it its daddy.
For a network that was promoted and built on as being a replacement for pay-per-view, DAZN has been anything but that for the last 2.5 years. And to me, and I'm sure you'd concur with this, it's absolutely disgraceful.
And like I told you in our text messages, and I now get to announce it here, I am done. We talked about the cost, the high cost review. We talked about the size of these streaming platforms. We actually put the clip out from last week's episode about a day or two ago about ESPN Plus and how it's officially going to move up to $109.99 a year the day before UFC 295. And I said, and I've said here, Sam, that some changes were going to have to be made and some sacrifices. Well, we've had our first casualty on my end, and that's DAZN. I'm done. I unfortunately, because of their and I saw somebody, Zan, on social media also say they were done and basically say, the zone with the whole 30 days notice thing, and now it's like it's on your bill till April or something, which is laughable in itself. But you know what? Anything to just get them out of my head, because for the price that per month and per year that they are paying, like, it's more expensive than ESPN Plus, and they're just not delivering the content.
Yeah, and I guess I can announce it here too. I've been a canceled. I've been a DAZN non-subscriber since the middle of the summer. So,
what's the point at this point?
There is none.
The end of Bellator MMA on Showtime. It is the end of Showtime Sports itself. The Showtime Sports brand, which housed boxing for years, Bellator MMA the last couple of years, housed Inside the NFL, documentaries, all the different, fight hype stuff leading up to some major boxing events.
So all
no
access,
more.
Which was
all access. That's what I was referring to. Yeah. Yep. Gone. No more. Everything is done.
Yeah, it certainly is a very era-changing time in combat sports, with Showtime leaving the picture. That kind of ends the HBO Showtime era of the sport of boxing, where everything just felt bigger on premium television. And, it just kind of feels weird that Bellator 301, which is taking place in my hometown, is going to be the last Bellator event to air on the network. So that'll be a very somber night. I'm already kind of mentally preparing myself that there might be some tears in the various media spaces that week and the night of the event. But nonetheless, as we kind of alluded to earlier and off the air, Showtime for me personally was a huge aspect of my combat sports fandom. I'm a late boxing fan, and most of the major boxing matches that I've seen have taken place on that network, as well as me getting more interested in
and how game-changing it was that HBO was no longer going to be in the boxing business. And now here we are at neither HBO or Showtime. The legendary premium channels there you would watch boxing, late 80s, 90s, 2000. Neither of them are around.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So I guess that leads me to my next question. Could you see boxing going in a direction where it's DAZN, ESPN Plus, and broadcast television, or is
I
it only
think we're there. I think we're there already, Sam. You know, the only one. Well, I wouldn't say we are there completely because, you know, Top Rank still airs cards on linear ESPN. But who's not to say? And Sam, we talked about this, you know, on our show. I talked about this with Nick Morganson on Empty the Bench Sports. Sorry, having a little echo in my headphones for a second. But what happens if ESPN decides, you know, hey, screw the television, that the ESPN Plus, the streaming service that we know, becomes what ESPN is? Because I think that's a realistic thing that could happen, and that's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I could easily see it. You're now already seeing it with college football. You're seeing it with the NFL, where, you know, they're saying, oh, there's multiple different ways to watch NFL games now via NFL Plus and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, that is where it's going. It is catering towards, you know, my generation, so to speak. I mean, at least with my generation, me being a few years younger than you, we literally grown up on streaming. So, yeah, I could easily see a direction to where it just only goes that way, which also leads me to say this, and I think I'm shouting it from the rooftops, but there needs to be something in the next 5 or 6 years where there is a bundle package to where when you purchase ESPN Plus, you get everything that ESPN Plus is being offered to you. I think it needs to go in that direction.
And here's the crazy part, Sam. The UFC still wants to book Jones or Miocic, and they are willing to wait to 2024, potentially International Fight Week 2024, to make it happen. So, Zan, there is a chance for the next year we could be carrying around with 2 UFC heavyweight champions.
Yeah, this interim title situation seems like the ESPN Plus decision, because you and I both know they always want title fights at the top of the card. So I think Go ahead.
Okay, but Zan, we're talking about the light heavyweight we're talking about the heavyweight title, but we're also talking about the light heavyweight title on this card, Zan. The last 2 light heavyweight champions, we talked about how cursed that belt is. You know, they suffered injuries, Yuri being one of them, and they vacated the title. There are some calls that with Jones being out for as long as he might be, that he should basically vacate the championship.
I don't think so, because isn't the rule that it's supposed to be a year that you're out and then you have to vacate it? If he's only going to be out 8 months, he shouldn't relinquish the belt.
I mean, this isn't going to be a full year for Yuri. The first light heavyweight title fight, the vacant one, was December. So I think there were fears about a 1 year. So maybe in that regard. But still, Zan, I think it's kind of ridiculous that that there's a chance we could go 1 year with 2 heavyweight champions. I know there was a period of time where the UFC did have 2 heavyweight champions following Randy Couture trying to get out of his contract. I think that was to fight. You mentioned him before, Fedor Emelianenko.
Yeah.
But I think that's a different circumstance because that's a contract legal situation. This is an injury. What this Fury and Ngannou fight was not a robbery. Like you said, I could have, if you told me I had a 95-94 Ngannou, guess what? I'm not going to argue with you because, like I said, that first round, maybe one of the last rounds, could have gone either way. So you know what?
I scored it for Fury. But
okay.
But I'll admit, if they had given the fight to Ngannou 95-94, I would have said, okay, that makes
that's a fine scorecard.
Mm-hmm.
And Zan, like I kind of alluded to, since I had it 95-94, because you considered a 10-8. If Ngannou had dropped him one more time, the fight would have been a draw on my scorecard.
Right, either it's a draw, or depending on how you score one of the early rounds, Ngannou wins the fight.
Right. Outright. So it is not a robbery in that regard. Now, here's what I will say. I think all 3 judges did get it wrong. Because first of all, as you kind of alluded to, Zan, the 96-93, where did Fury win 7 rounds? When did Fury win most of the rounds? Because obviously a 6'4", he would have won most rounds, but that overwhelming? No, absolutely not.
No, I mean the rounds where he was the most overwhelming were probably 5 through 8, roughly. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where it just felt like it was inevitable that it was going to happen one way or another. It was just a matter of when. So it's nice to know that it's
We still do not have an official press release from either promotion, but
yeah,
Al Salino has reported on it. Your buddy Cole Sheldon at DJPen.com has reported on it, so we are going to run with it.
Yeah, so there's that, and then of course you have to give credit to Todd Atkins too, who has done fine reporting on this story. At least from the looks of the report, we know how it's going to work. Bellator is going to run for probably 2 years as its own separate promotion, and then all of those fighters are just going to dissolve into the PFL from there. So yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where you don't really know what's going to happen. You don't really know what's going to happen to the Bellator roster. The fate of the Grand Prix that's coming up, you really don't know much other than Bellator 301 is going to happen. And then even though this purchase is official according to reports, you don't know what the future of any of those divisions is going to look like. And to me, I feel like it could end up being one of those UFC Pride acquisitions where most of the Pride fighters will go to the UFC, and whoever's left will have to find other promotions. My biggest question in this whole thing is, with this merger, and if Bellator is going to run separately, is Scott Coker still going to be the president? I think everything is still just so in limbo that we don't really know what to think at this moment. At least I don't.
I would hope at the very least.
And me being a rankings panelist along with 24 other media members, I have no idea what this means from a media perspective either. I don't think anybody knows.
I think, Zan, having the Ultimate Fighter right after Monday Night Raw kind of like hooked me in and led me into everything. And I have said it before on maybe not our podcast, but on a different podcast that I appeared on, that when I saw that first Ultimate Fighter season, and I saw how crazy things could get, I'm like, this is a bit interesting. Obviously, around that time, Zan, 2005 was, reality TV was the thing. It was the mainstream, and it was taking over America like a chokehold. But then, Zan, like you said, I was originally a pro wrestling guy, and then you see, what's it called? You see that first Ultimate Fighter fight, and Bobby Southworth knocks his opponent out cold, and it's like, oh, this is something different. But kind of like what you were saying, Zan, my reaction, that I didn't cower away. I was just like, oh, and like the gears were going in 10-year-old me, and I'm like, and I started just tuned in week after week after week, because the next week after Bobby Southworth, pulled us off that knockout after cutting 20 pounds in like the 2 days or something like that, which is unbelievable. The very next week, Zan, was my first experience of watching Diego Sanchez in the cage when he demonstrated a rear naked chokehold to win his fight.
My introduction into this crazy fisticuffs world was at 6 years old in a teddy bear chair, being sat down and accidentally, and my dad accidentally purchased UFC 61, which is Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock 2. And I remember, I remember watching the promos thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And I don't know if you remember, you probably do, but for those of you who are newer fans of the sport, there was a time in UFC history that you could only buy the pay-per-view, and those were the only fights you got to see. You did not get the prelims. You didn't.
Zan, sorry to interrupt. If you were lucky, and certain fights, there were a lot of fights that didn't go to distance, a lot of finishes. Maybe you'd get a prelim bout or two.
Yeah. which I'm gonna continue the story now. So, I just remember he ordered the event, and I just think the promo's the coolest thing ever. And I just asked my dad, when is it gonna start? And he's like, you see that countdown in the corner of the screen? That's when it's gonna start. And when I saw the Gladiator intro, may it rest in peace. It's now 11 years old. That thing is not that graced my television screen, but I thought the intro was the coolest thing ever, and I thought specifically Ken Shamrock's entrance. I don't know what he walked out to, but whatever he walked out to, I thought was unbelievable, and I thought that the same. I was so young that I thought the same fighters competed on every single event. So I thought,
well, I mean, in fairness, the pro wrestlers compete on every single event.
This is concerning.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it. I've never been more anxious to go to an MMA event in my entire life for the sole purpose that I don't know if everything is going to be a last or if everything is going to continue as such. It's so confusing that me, as someone who I feel like is in the know with most things Bellator, has no idea what's going on, and it's literally just madness. And even to see that there are 16 fights on the card, which is something I've never seen personally on the MMA. And I've never seen 16 fights on one card before. This just leads to a ton of concerns for me, and I really don't want there to be concerns. I want this event to be successful for everyone's sake, but just the coverage around it to me just feels very it feels very un-Bellator like. I can say with certainty that with me being there, Bellator 297 definitely felt bigger than what this event is currently feeling right now. It's not getting the respect it deserves, number one, and number two, I think there's all this behind the scenes of going on that no one knows about that's overshadowing how good the card actually is. So to me, with this potentially being the final one ever, I think the vibe in my description of this is more so just nervousness and anguish, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, San, we've seen the ups and downs of Bellator. We've been there for the good and the bad. I think my first Bellator card I watched was at some point in the early 2010s. It was not long after Strikeforce started its process of starting to go away that I tuned into a Bellator card. It was still in the days of the tournaments and the seasons. I remember buying the first Bellator pay-per-view in 2014. I remember buying the second Bellator pay-per-view, the one in New York City in 2017. And it's amazing, Zan, to see what has happened with this promotion and the good and the bad.
And now this is more of a geeky question, but this is how I operate because I like to know all the different intricacies. If this actually happens and they run as two separate promotions, Tom, what in the world is ESPN going to do when it comes to delegating their coverage, considering 90% of it is dedicated to the UFC? Do you think there's going to be some sort of gray area if this new version of Bellator that we're calling it, quote unquote, is going to go that route? Or do you think they find a different broadcast partner and going back to DAZN or another partner that, quite frankly, we don't know about in order to fill that void? Because to be quite honest with you, if I'm a television exec or if I'm someone very close to that decision, I would be nervous.
First of all, to what you were referring to before with ESPN, I mean, it almost feels, I think I've said this before, it feels monopolistic in a way, because they're going to have, if it's run by two separate promotions, UFC, Bellator, and PFL. Number two, I guess you're kind of right. As a television executive, you might be a little iffy about taking on Bellator if it's true that Bellator is only going to run for a couple of years, and it's essentially, it could be seen as like a feeder fed during that time. I'm going to throw one at you. Could you see, because you know how ESPN is, worldwide leader, that about everything, they want all the content. Like, I've used this expression before of ESPN when it came to the cuts earlier this year, content over commentators. Could you see a scenario where Bellator becomes exclusively ESPN Plus? like it's never on mainstream ESPN.
I think Bellator is a big enough brand name to where it's shown that if you put on the right fights, it can do well on major cable television. So no, unless there's a desperate situation where they have to do it because of an overflow of content on linear, then no, I do not see them going that route.
Okay.
Whatsoever.
Okay. Follow-up question. Could you
Okay.
see a scenario where Bellator is on cable per se, but is never on the main ESPN channel?
Yeah, for sure. And I understand what the PFL is doing, with trying to make Bellator an international product. But if you think about, Tom, where Bellator was during COVID, and I hate to even use this comparison, but if you think about, Bellator, going to Chicago 3 times in a year, if you think about Bellator, going back to San Jose and going back to the Mohegan Sun, to me, some of the nostalgic or the mystique of Bellator to me is being taken away if we're just going to do most of the events overseas when primarily your company and your product has been homegrown in places like San Jose, in places like Uncasville, Connecticut, in places like Missouri, for example. So to me, I feel like it's going to be something that a lot of people are going to have to get used to as we enter this new era. And I just hope that these I'm gonna dub it this. I haven't seen anyone do this, but I hope these BICS cards are not just these cards of Bellator fighters that we've never heard of. I hope that these one-off PFL Bellator events are treated as PFL Bellator events, because what I worry is that this Bellator, this new version of it, is going to be treated like the Bellator version of DWCS, and truly that's something I don't want to see, just given the mystique of the organization. But I also understand that this is now part of the PFL umbrella, and they're doing the best they can to cater to as many fan bases as they can. But I will say, though, the PFL making this splash in the current time that we're in, with the ongoing impending UFC lawsuit and all the conversations around fighter pay and all the conversations around oversaturation of cards and pay-per-view
And Francis Ngannou.
and just Ngannou, I feel like they're really trying to make a splash to say, yeah, we're not just in this for the short term, we're in this for the long haul. And I feel like that's what did in the deal for me, and that's what they're really trying to do, to kind of transition into the UFC Fight Night card that was this past weekend from the Moody Center. I think it had all that and more, including a massive upset in the main event. I don't think anybody called this. I said Tarzukian would win this fight a week ago, and I was correct. Unfortunately for me, I went 5-7 on the night. It was one of my rougher prediction sprees for a UFC event. It was pretty disappointing to watch how many predictions I got wrong on this card, just because sometimes the unpredictability of MMA is what it is. But I did not get this one wrong. Arman Tarzukian, 64 seconds, knocking out Beneil Dariush, what is now back-to-back losses for Dariush. Honestly, a dominant win for Tarzukian, and a win that he absolutely needed to catapult himself into being a top contender in a very stacked lightweight division. And one of those wins where you'll never forget it. Similar to what I just alluded to. I mean, the way he finished Dariush is only something that, from my recollection, Charles Oliveira has ever done to him.
I mean, who wasn't caught off guard, Zan? Who wasn't caught off guard by Arman Tsarukyan, the kind of performance that you had? As you kind of said, I don't think, we both called that Tsarukyan was going to win this fight. I don't think we had it that it was going to be in 64 seconds. I don't think we had it that it was going to be a knee followed by a right hand that drops Dariush out cold. None of us, I don't think anybody here had the expectation it was going to be that quick, that emphatic. And for Tsarukyan, it's a fantastic win. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's back-to-back losses for Dariush now, and he will have to have a rebound win at some point. But it's Charles Oliveira and now Arman Tsarukyan who is going to be jumping into the top 5 with a win like this. So those aren't bad losses for Dariush. He's just gonna have to, it's gonna have to be back to the drawing board in 2024 with him. But for Tsarukyan, I mean, it's a world of possibility now. And Dana even mentioned at the post-fight press conference, Dan, that he thinks that the expectation of Makhachev versus Oliveira 2 might have been shaken up by the way that Sarukian dominated this fight.
But I think this is going to be one of those events where Showtime has to give it their best shot, and of course, I think they will do that. I think Minnesota is a very interesting backdrop. If you would have told me, oh, it's in Brooklyn or it's in Texas for the last one, I would have believed that. But to hear that it's in Minnesota to me was quite strange. Nonetheless, this is a solid main event. I definitely think that David Morrell is the better fighter here, so I will take him to win a decision. But I think the bigger story is going to be, what is this broadcast going to look like? Is there going to be any mention that this is the final Showtime broadcast ever? Is there going to be any mention of the history that's taken place on that network from a boxing perspective? Yeah, I think so too.
I think so, because they did that with Bellator. Even though they were uncertain of what was going to happen, they were doing that with Bellator. So I feel like if they did that with Bellator, which was a more recent acquisition, I know about the history of Strikeforce and all that, but if they were able to do that for MMA, they're going to do it for boxing, because boxing has been a staple on that network, for a long time at this point. All right, and that is going to do it for the best of 2023 with the MMA Outsiders. And here's to a fantastic 2024. Before we get out of here, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. To my right is my great co-host, Zain Bando. Find his work over at bjpen.com, MMA Knockouts, part of the Sports Illustrated family. So much more. You can find his work over. You can follow him on social media. Pardon me, at ZanBando99. I'm Tom Albano, contributor to MMA News and Fans at MMA, as well as with the PFL website. Cheers to the PFL for allowing me to be a part of them with the 2023 season. You can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. All right, Sam, before we get... Oh, and also shout out to the website, etbpodcast.com. Look for some great blogs from some of our contributors, as well as make sure to take the MMA Outsiders on the road with you with Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other audio-only platforms. If you are listening to us on those platforms, we thank you so much. Make sure to come to YouTube, our home base, and hit the subscribe button, youtube.com/ETB Network. We've passed 650 subscribers, and we're continuing to climb. We thank you all for your support. All right, Zan. So before we get out of here, I say happy 2024. Make sure it's an incredible one, and make sure to enter 2024 to enter that year as Joe Pyfer would.
Yeah, please remember to enter the year as Joe Pyfer, as he has a really big year coming up, starting with the massive fight against Jack Hermanson. And of course, be sure that the beginning of 2024 starts off with a bang and eventually ends with a bang, as we know that the next 365 days in this round-the-clock sport is going to be just absolute madness. So thank you for being along the ride with us. As you guys know, we'll be off for the next couple of weeks before we come back to preview UFC 297. But until then, we hope you enjoyed this best of production, and we'll be back in your life on Tuesday, January 16th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, for another year of MMA madness. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more. He's Tom, I'm Zan, and we will see you guys soon.
Don't you mean the other way around, considering what you pulled at the end of it? Well, during May.
For Zan, I'm Tom. Thanks again for listening, and have a wonderful week. What?
You said for Zan, I'm Tom.
I'm sorry. I guess we can do it again.
For Tom, I'm Zan. We will see you in 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. We hope it's
Happy New Year.
We'll see you on January 16th for another season of the MMA Outsiders.
Happy New Year.